All right. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Women Blaze Trails Festival. We are on day 3, and in fact, we are also in the final 4-hour stretch of the festival. It has been an incredible weekend so far, starting Friday night, running through all day Saturday, and now into Sunday afternoon. We've been all over the world meeting incredible scientists, explorers, photographers, filmmakers, engineers, conservationists, you name it. Hearing their stories, their challenges, what they're researching, expeditions, stories growing up. Such great storytellers we've had joining us over the course of the entire weekend. So I do just want to touch briefly on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you've never explored the website before, we are hosting this weekend and have organized this festival. We're all about inspiring the next generation of scientists and explorers. Each month, we run up to 60 live events connecting classrooms across North America and beyond with scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists from all over the world. Sometimes it's virtual field trips. Sometimes it's guest speakers. Sometimes we're live on volcanoes. Sometimes we're at zoos and aquariums. You never know what's going on the site. Every February, we kick all the men out for the entire month, hosting amazing women in science, exploration, conservation. So do check it out. We've got about 45 live events over the course of the month. Anybody can join the events live via YouTube. Classrooms can grab camera spots. Our channel has probably 2,000 past events that you can check out as an educator, as parents, as students, whatever you like. So we are continuing with our explorations here. We're going to spend a little time with Kinga Phillips. She has tested herself for the past 20 plus years traveling the globe, scuba diving, free diving, spearfishing, surfing, jumping out of airplanes, spelunking, swimming with sharks. She's a writer, producer, and an on-camera journalist. She has traveled the world covering subjects like police corruption in Mexico, gangs in LA, humanitarian and environmental causes, world conflicts, natural disasters. But on the flip side, she's also explored things like nightlife and festivals and exotic food in some of the world's most vibrant cities. She is also a fellow of the Explorers Club. Let's bring Kinga in live with us right now. Hey, Kinga, how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Joe. What an introduction. Proves that I'm a jack of all trades, a master of none.
You know what? I think that's important. I think it's important to explore the world around you, never say no to opportunities, and ask, why not? Why can't I do this? Let's go. I'm on.
That is exactly what I am here to talk to you about and kind of explain how I got here and then introduce you to some really cool stuff that I get to do.
Perfect. Sounds good to me. So I'm going to hide out backstage. I know you've got a few images to share. I know that I've got a few video clips queued up. So let's get right into it, Kinga. Let's get into your world.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Well, I am so excited to be here. I have been hanging out and listening to all the other talks. Amazing women. I'm still trying to figure out how I can get my hands on one of those submersibles from the last talk. That would definitely assist me in some of the shark diving that we do. But let me give you a little bit of background on who I am and how I got here. So I am an on-camera journalist. I'm a writer, a TV producer, and then I'm also a conservationist. So I have the distinct honor of being a bit of a mutt and a hybrid, and it has really worked out wonderfully. And that story is because when I went to college, had 7 different majors, had no idea what I wanted to do, and then decided I wanted to tell stories, and journalism would be the best way to do that. And I grew up as a child of parents who were explorers. They were scientists. My dad, a geologist, my mom, a pharmacist and a botanist. And we traveled the world, and culture, exploration, nature, wildlife was always so important to us. So when I went to college and ultimately decided to do journalism, I knew that I didn't particularly want to do news, but I wanted to do something of the likes of National Geographic and go out into the world and tell really, really great stories. And as I started to do that about 20 something years ago, I also started getting into the ocean space and surfing and diving. And one day I got to go out and do a shark dive in a cage. And before that, like so many people of my generation, I watched the movie Jaws, was absolutely terrified. And I got to go do the shark dive. And in that dive, I was blown away. And I thought, wow, everything I've ever been told by the media about sharks, by movies, television, news, books, everything, it's wrong. they're not trying to pry me out of this cage and eat me. They're actually really amazing and cool, and they're kind of the underdog. And my love affair with sharks began right there. And then the hybrid world kind of came into play because I was doing journalism and hosting shows for Travel Channel and National Geographic and getting to do these really cool stories. And as I started to produce, I started to think, wow, I have a real opportunity and a platform here to talk about things that I think are really important. And I decided that was sharks. And I remember the first time I got to go on National Geographic, I was doing a show called America's Lost Treasures. It was about the history and artifacts in this amazing country. And people would come to museums and they would show us stuff. And then we would authenticate that and we would tell the story of those items. And one of the people brought into me megalodon teeth, and we were in Savannah, Georgia, and he had actually all these fossilized teeth. And he said, I can take you out and I can show you where to find these. And he did. He took us to the river in Savannah where they dredge. And because they dredge the river and then they put all the sediment on the shore, you can walk around and find things like fossilized baby mammoth milk teeth. Somewhere in here, I even have a fossilized stingray barb and all kinds of shark's teeth. And that episode really hit home for me and for a lot of people. And then people started asking me questions about sharks. And I thought, wait a minute, this is a super cool platform to get to actually tell these stories about these animals that people don't seem to really understand. And I got to do some talk shows and talk to people. And I realized that everyone wanted to hear about sharks. But when the conversation came up, everyone went, oh gosh, they're so scary. How are you still alive? You know, you swim with them and you do things. And I went, all right, I have a mission now. And around that time, I also got to meet Shark Allies and an amazing woman named Stephanie Brendel, who runs Shark Allies. So I'm trying to share this with you, and Joe will let me know if I'm doing a good job because my screen sharing skills leave a lot to be desired. But this is Stephanie Brendel, who in the shark space in the conservation world, she is a powerhouse. She is my mentor. And she also was instrumental in the first shark fin ban in the United States, which was in Hawaii in 2010. And then I believe went into effect in 2011. Since then, we've had 14 states do shark fin bans and a lot of amazing stuff happening in conservation. But as I got to know Stephanie and I got to know the Shark Allies folks, and they're all amazing women, I thought, here's Stephanie with a tiger shark in Hawaii. I thought, wow, this is really cool. How can I bring this into the world that I do? So one of the first things that I started doing was I went out and I started writing shark articles. So I went out and I thought, okay, I'm going to inform people as much as I possibly can. This actually was a very successful Shark Allies campaign. We did actually get to push through a fin ban in Florida in the last 2 years, which was huge. And every time Shark Week would come up, I would find great stories to tell about Paul DeGelder and stories of redemption. And I just really wanted to make it my mission to get out there and to tell these stories that I thought were so important and that the media was really missing there. And one of the cool things that happened was in, I think it was 2013 or 2015, the Shark Allies girls and I were sitting around and a news story came up about a shark attack that had happened in Malibu. And I read the story and maybe my journalistic spidey senses tingled a little bit. And I went, you know what? Something about the story is a little off to me. And the story was that in Malibu, there was a shark fisherman named Dylan Marks, and he had been attacked and mauled by a hammerhead. And I thought, you know what? I want to check in on this. So I found Dylan on Facebook. I wrote him and I thought, worst case scenario, he can block me and say no. That's what people do on Facebook. And I said, listen, I heard your story and I actually think there's more to it. Something just really, it seems a little off about it to me. And he wrote me back right away and said, oh my goodness, thank you so much for reaching out. I would love to speak to you. I would love to speak to Shark Allies. My story has been so misrepresented. And here in a second, I'm going to ask Joe to play that first video, but I'll tell you a little bit beforehand about that and how it's kind of led me into the space of being a double agent for sharks in the media, because I am the media. I have shows on Shark Week. I do a lot of talk shows. I talk to people all the time, and the subject of sharks comes up a lot. And it has become a real point for me to show the other side of that because of the conservation work that I do. Because very often the media presents sharks as something that they are not. And the stories that they tell are often, quite frankly, wrong. So I'm going to ask Joe to play this first video, which is the interview that we did with Dylan Marks, the victim of the shark attack in Malibu. And Stephanie Brendel cut this together, I think, in a very brilliant way. So Joe, if you can play that first video, that would be awesome.
I'm Dylan Marks, and I'm here to speak with you about my encounter with the hammerhead shark.
Dylan Marks, a catch and release fisherman, was kayaking a mile off the coast of Malibu when a 10-foot hammerhead shark took a chunk out of his foot.
What happened to me was not an attack. I wouldn't even call what happened to me, it wasn't even a bite.
That kayaker's close encounter with the shark bitten on the foot off the coast of Malibu.
Paula, some terrifying moments on the beach here. Scary sight on the beach this Labor Day weekend. A shark attack victim on a stretcher.
We launched from Deer Creek pretty early in the morning, watched the sunrise. We're fishing, this El Nino has been incredible, so we've had all sorts of animals we rarely get to see. We got done fishing, we knew there were some sharks in the area. The first hammerhead came through and would check us out and kind of hang around the perimeter and come through and just scope the scene. And another one, and by the end of it, we had 3 hammerheads in the water around us. And then this big hammerhead kind of came in behind it, grabbed the bait, and then that's when sort of everything went downhill. That's sort of what led to this. We got towed around by the shark for a little while, and as we brought it up, I was pretty eager to get the hook out of its mouth, and we were using a pretty long leader, and I pulled it out by hand, and I swung my legs around in the water so I could get my arms on the shark and kind of pull it up into my lap to get the hook out. And as I was trying to reach down for it and I had the line in my hand, this scared animal, that I was put in this really precarious situation, was thrashing about and trying to get away, and while it was swimming with its mouth open, my foot got in the way.
All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a 10-foot-long hammerhead shark came out and attacked him.
I collided with this animal as it was spinning to swim away. The shark didn't come at me. The shark at no point was swimming towards us. It was afraid and trying to survive. The first time I got to see my family, they said that this is in the media and they're saying that it was a shark attack. And I instantly kind of grabbed the bed, like, let's get up and go talk to someone right now. Like, there's someone needs to dispel this myth. And so the next day I kind of got on the horn and got some things together and met with some people. And when I shared my story with them, I was really excited because I got to share what had happened. I had opened my mouth and what came out was like this chopped up version of what was important. And it fit the same mold, and it fit the same sort of cookie cutter, let's make people afraid, or this can be sensationalized. Let's not actually go with the truth. Let's go with what we want, because this will sell, and the truth won't. They took me being reckless and then pointed a gun at sharks one more time.
And the summer of the shark isn't over yet.
As an ocean-going person, I surf, and anyone I come into contact with, who I get a chance to, I talk with about how try to find ways to dispel those myths. And I ended up on the news being a part of the same problem without even having a chance to have my voice out there. I'm not fishing for sharks anymore. Not because I'm afraid, but because I love and respect them. I would do anything to undo any fear or damage that I've done. I would do anything to go back and unhook that shark and never have put it in that position. If I can be one less person to do harm, I can be one more person on the other side doing good. That's what I've learned from all this, is that I have some agency and I can make some change.
So I love that video so much because there's an element of, well, that's awkward. Basically, the media told a story that wasn't there. I think my favorite headline there was Malibu mauling, very, very aggressive. And as you saw in the video, that was actually not the case at all. So, the story there is that this is very much how sharks are portrayed in the media. And that is terribly unfortunate because they really are amazing and incredible animals. One of the things that I've noticed often too is when you see sharks on screen, let's start with dolphins. When you see dolphins on screen, you'll usually hear beautiful, fun, adorable music. Do, 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 do. When you see Flipper swimming around, you're super happy. And most of the time, when you see sharks on screen, the music suddenly becomes very ominous. And even that sinks into our psyche. And that is something that is just, it's a very unfortunate thing because at an early age, we are introducing people to this idea that sharks are ominous and they are scary. So one of the career highlights that I have had in my life is getting to host an episode of Shark Week. And that was last year was the first one. We are actually doing another one this year in a yet to be undisclosed location, but we are going to be the first people there to work with a certain population of sharks. And last year we did that with the awesome Beneath the Waves and Dr. Austin Gallagher. And we went to Turks and Caicos and studied an unstudied population of tiger sharks, which was amazing. And we got to tag one of those sharks. And one of the things that I was so excited about was that show got to be female led, which was really cool. And we got to feature shark allies and we got to feature real science. And because I was a producer on that and the production company was adamant about really making this a smart show, we got to bring in real science and a real story. And there's a beautiful clip that I'm going to ask Joe to play in a second of me diving with a great hammerhead shark. And when I saw the first cut of the show, it actually brought me to tears because Shark Week has been around for 33 years, and I think it's awesome. I really love it. I know that it's kind of dramatic sometimes, but you can play the game and you can change the game. And we decided to change the game a little bit. And in this show called Tiger Queen, they actually kept an entire 2-minute long segment, and I cut it down to a minute here, of beautiful music playing when I'm diving with a great hammerhead, free diving. And that was such a win for me because even to have this interaction of a girl and a shark and this beautiful poetic classical music playing, and they put that on air, I thought, gosh, this is one of the coolest things I've ever had the honor to do. So Joe, if I could ask you to play that second clip, that'd be great. So that might seem like no biggie. And I know most of the women speaking here have been diving with sharks and had so many cool experiences that that's just kind of par for the course. But why that stood out so much to me and why that brought me to tears is you don't see a lot of that on television with that kind of music and that kind of interaction. And it was so special. At one point, you actually see me dig my hands into the sand because the current was so strong and she was coming towards me and I was coming towards her. And I thought, okay, I want to give her space so we don't collide. But that was such a special win getting to do that on Shark Week. And I hope that we get to do the same again this year. So Joe, I know that you're about 5 minutes behind and I've been talking for a little bit here and showing videos and photos. So if you want to do questions, I'm game for that.
I think that sounds great. Kinga, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Myself as a diver, I love diving with sharks. When I was teaching in the classroom, students would say the same thing. You're crazy, Mr. G. Why why do you want to get in the water with sharks? You're going to get attacked one day. Sharks are dangerous. And you brought up Jaws, and I know the author of the book regrets everything that's happened and the reputation that sharks have received. And I know sometimes, especially people in the science world, can kind of look at Shark Week sometimes and go, no, this is too much, too dramatic, too over the top. But thank you so much for putting shows out there that kind of show that side of sharks that I've experienced in the water with them, that most people experience in the water with them.
Well, thank you for that. And it was an honor to get to do that and to bring that to the screen. And quickly, funny story, the first time I met with the executives at Shark Week, the first thing I said to them, because I couldn't help it and just came out of my mouth, I said, you know, a lot of scientists don't like you, right? And they went, yeah, we know. So, you know, it's fun to get to change the game sometimes and to come in and, you know, you can either walk away and not partake, or you can be a game changer. And we had the really cool opportunity to do that.
Yeah. So we have a question here on YouTube, and I know this is going to be a hard question to answer, but we saw that clip that you shared with us. That's, you know, sensationalization of that hammerhead encounter, and it wasn't at all what happened. How much of what we're seeing in the media do you think is these sensationalized stories, and what can we do to try and, I don't know, get behind the scenes and find the real story? It's so hard sometimes.
That's a great question and a really tough question to answer as well, because it's hard to say, oh, so much, you know, 70% of what you see about sharks in the media is wrong. But I think that the message there is to question things and to question the stories. And you know what? Look, shark encounters happen. There are attacks. Sometimes they have tragic results. People also get smashed by refrigerators and all sorts of other things. And I even understand the primal fear of sharks. They are large fish in an environment that is not our environment, and they have really sharp teeth. Like, how could you not have some kind of even a healthy respect that could lead to fear for that? But I think the more people educate themselves, and if they have the opportunity to spend time with them, that starts to override the messaging that you're constantly brought in the media. And the reality is, you know, those stories, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what they say. And we saw clearly in that clip that it was wrong. Not all of them are 100% wrong, but there usually is a story. And we find that with a lot of shark encounters, and some that even end poorly, there's some kind of scientific messaging behind that. There's some kind of a reason for that encounter. And sometimes, quite honestly, it's even our fault. So there's how you can go about and really check the integrity of that, you know, whether you want to stalk people on Facebook and ask them questions, I don't know. But I think just to remember that it's not always 100% accurate, and there usually is another side to the story. That right there is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, even just the way things are described, like shark infested waters, but sharks live in the water. How can it be shark infested if that's their natural environment? I mean, sure, maybe a shark shows up in a restaurant, you call it a shark infested restaurant, but I don't think you can call the ocean shark infested, and that kind of language, right? That kind of language needs to change.
I make that joke all the time. I always say, look, that's like you coming into my living room and saying it's Kinga infested. Yeah, I live here. It's Kinga infested. But that was another great thing about what Discovery Channel did and what Ping Pong, the production company, did, is we changed a lot of the language. Like, you don't hear the word aggressive. You don't hear the term shark infested in Tiger Queen, the show we did, because we were really particular about not having that kind of language in there. And I'm super grateful to them that they allowed me to do that.
Yeah. So you have been traveling around the world for, 20 or so years now. You've seen and experienced a lot of things. You've probably seen change over time as well. So I'm wondering, as a woman traveling the world, reporting on stories, jumping into the water, what have you seen change? Maybe have the challenges changed? Has it gotten a bit easier as a woman in your field? How are things?
That's a great question as well. And I have seen change, because I think there are a lot of incredible women in science and travel and exploration and all of that. For a long time, they weren't quite as highlighted. Like, I even remember when I started scuba diving, I would often show up and want to go to a dive shop, and the Blue Hole in Belize was a perfect example. And they had me sit and wait and really questioned my skill set before they allowed me to go. And I knew it was because I was a girl and I was sitting there saying, oh, I want to go do this really cool scuba dive to 145 feet. And I've seen attitudes change over the years, and I've seen women be a lot more highlighted, a lot more respected in the field. You don't get like the triple head turn now when you're hiking by yourself in Alaska, which you used to all the time. People would wonder why you were there by yourself. And I think you see a lot more of that. And some of it is social media. That's the good side of social media. And some of it is the traditional media that I think has allowed women a greater space of representation, which is really excellent and extraordinary.
All right, that's so great to hear. We had Sylvia Earle kick things off on Friday night, and she shared a clip from when she was, diving with Tektite, 50 years ago now. And the clip, the males were called aquanauts, and they were calling the women divers aquanauties or aqua babes. And, things have changed so much. I'm sure there's still work to be done. I know there's still work to be done. But it is good to hear, those triple takes have stopped, and the double checking of can you go that deep and things like that. It's good to hear that things like that are changing.
It is great to hear. Definitely.
All right. Well, Kinga, I want to share your contacts here. There we go. So Twitter and Instagram, if people want to follow along on your adventures. Obviously, the show coming up on Shark Week is really exciting. So I hope people tune in and check that out. And it's just been such a pleasure to have you with us today, sharing some of the media work that you're doing. And, near and dear to me is sharks. So sharing that message about sharks and dispelling some of those myths is so important.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me on. And now I'm going to sit back and enjoy some of the other speakers.
Awesome. Well, Kinga, again, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
Thank you, Joe. Bye.
See ya. All right, we are going to stick with some ocean action, because why not? Although there is some land action in this next coming event as well, not just ocean. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. So excited. We've got Gazde Chilinga joining us. She is a nature conservationist, geneticist, and conservation advocate. So as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Zurich in Switzerland, she works to bridge the gap between scientific research and real-world application for genetic conservation of Aldabra giant tortoises native to the Seychelles. And I think this is so cool. We work with the Seychelles Island Foundation, and we do live events for classrooms where we visit the Vallée de Mai and Aldabra as well, and connect with scientists working on the islands. They've just got a great new communication system on Aldabra, and it's going to allow us to do some really cool live events in the coming months. I'm excited about. So she has led and contributed to several turtle conservation outreach programs around the world, including Singapore, Thailand, Myanmar, and Turkey. So let's bring her in live with us right now. Hello, Gazde, how are we doing?
Hello, Joe. I'm doing fine, thank you. And how are you?
Oh, great. I mean, it's just been a wild weekend. The time is flying by. I can't believe we're in our last kind of run of events for the weekend. So many great stories. I'm so excited to have you joining us. I'm going to take a back seat. I'm going to throw myself backstage, and I want you to take over a bit and take us into your world.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to share my presentation. Just a second. Okay. All right, I hope you can see me and hear me. So I will be mainly talking about genomic aspects in the conservation of threatened turtles. Before going into my research, the details of my research, I'd like to start with my background. I was born and raised in Istanbul, Turkey, and I got my bachelor's degree from Istanbul Technical University at the Department of Molecular Biology and Genetics. I have basically a solid biotechnology background, but after several years, I decided to go on for ecology and nature conservation, and I did my master's in Middle East Technical University on phylogeny and phylogeography of brown bears in Turkey. Then I moved to Singapore to work on critically endangered turtles, freshwater turtle, endemic to Myanmar and Cambodia. So today I will be talking about a part of my PhD research and my current postdoctoral research. And I also would like to talk about my life as a conservation geneticist. When I tell people that I'm a conservation geneticist, sometimes they get puzzled. They ask if I clone some rare turtles to increase their numbers. But actually what I do is I try to understand the remnants of genetic variation in the threatened populations or species, and I try to find ways to conserve that variation, hoping that their adaptability for changing environment will go hand in hand with that retained genetic variation. There is also another thing that I'd like to mention before diving in what I have been doing for the last 8-9 years is the distinction between the science of nature conservation and conservation biology. So basically nature conservation is a multidisciplinary field, which includes social sciences and natural sciences, and conservation biology is actually a subset of it. And conservation genetics is a subset of conservation biology. So the case studies that I'm going to mention here is basically a component of a bigger conservation projects that have been going on for several years. Why turtles? So of all the known turtle species in the world, I mean, half of them are threatened with extinction. And here on the map, you see the number of threatened species on a given region. And as you can see, Southeast Asia is one of the hotspots of threatened turtle species. And for my PhD, I was working on Burmese roof turtle, which is endemic to Myanmar, one of the rarest turtles left in the world. And although they were widely distributed around Myanmar once, unfortunately, they got into a point that they were thought as extinct. And finally, I mean, there are several populations left. They were rediscovered, and it was known that there were several populations left, but currently we know that there is only one population left in the world from this turtle species, and it is located in the northwestern side of Myanmar, in rural Myanmar. And this population was kind of ecologically extinct because there were very little number of breeding females that was thought as less than 10, depending on the field observations, but the number of breeding males was unknown prior to my PhD. And once the population was spotted, Wildlife Conservation Society and Turtle Survival Alliance initiated in situ and ex situ conservation together. Basically, the beaches that were used by the females for egg laying was under protection. And then turtle conservation team there collected those eggs in the wild, and they transferred them into secure places, reared those hatchlings there, and by doing this for several years, they ended up with having hundreds of individuals in captivity from this very rare turtle species. So my PhD came into play at this point because the ultimate goal of this conservation project was to have self-sustaining turtle populations in their natural habitats. But if you have hundreds of individuals from such a rare species, would you introduce all of them together in the wild? Probably not, right? So my project was aimed to understand the current genetic variation and the relationship between these individuals so that I could manage these genetic variation and pick individuals to be reintroduced into the wild. And also because we had no idea about the numbers of breeding females and males in the wild, I would do parentage analysis to the individuals that we have in captivity, like as we do in humans, and try to estimate the numbers of the wild breeders. To do that, I went to Myanmar several times and collected tissue samples, extracted DNA, and then came the question, which methodology to use. So genome sequencing, as you may have heard, is becoming more and more cheap and feasible, but still sequencing the whole genome of many individuals at the same time is still too costly and too laborious and computationally too costly. So for the conservation project that you have to decide quite quickly, this type of whole genome approaches would not be suitable. So I had to decide quick, and I had to find a way to make this budget friendly and feasible for these individuals, for this species, where we had no genetic tools beforehand. And that's why I, instead of looking at the whole genomes, I basically looked at several parts of the genomes of these individuals and decided which individuals to go into wild. And by doing that, we actually reintroduced these several individuals that I picked into several stretches of the Chinwin River that the species was naturally found at least 2 times at the initial step, as an initial step. But after reintroduction, there was another point, like, what if the worst case scenario happens? What if the reintroductions wouldn't work? So we needed to have a genetic stock of the species, which could be contained in Myanmar, that could be located in Myanmar, as well as outside of Myanmar, just in case. So in order to have such colonies, which are named assurance and satellite colonies, I came up with several lists of individuals that were picked by genomic approaches. And 25 individuals picked, as I explained, were sent to Singapore Zoo. So currently there are 25 individuals in Singapore Zoo that were transferred from Myanmar, and these individuals actually stand as a genetic stock for the entire species. Okay, this was the conservation of the genetic diversity of a species, that aspect. But how about the human perspective of this story? So these individuals, this species is at the brink of extinction because of human behavior, basically, like pollution, habitat destruction, or overexploitation. So the idea of our secondary project in that area was to visit the villages alongside the Chinwin River, where these individuals have already been introduced. And by interviewing the villagers, they try to understand the attitudes, local people's attitudes towards turtle conservation in the area. To do that, we visited at least 30 villages in one season with my local collaborators there. And we asked several questions to the villagers. Because there was very restricted land connection between the villages, we were taking a boat to visit all those villages, and we were basically being guests of the villagers there. So the idea was to show some pictures of animals, because these animals were so rare, most of the time people couldn't recognize them, or it was important for us to understand if local people could distinguish them from the other turtle species in that river. And if they could, we also started asking questions if they could understand or distinguish the nests or eggs of the species, if they have ever seen such nests, if they have heard some stories about the species, if they have heard about our conservation programs in the region, or if these programs restrict their daily lives, and so on. So it took us more than 1.5 years to come up with all those questions and do the field work and come up with conclusions. And at the very end, the idea was to finish the surveys and try to reach as many people as possible to explain what we have been doing. And as a result of this project, we realized that because local people's daily lives weren't that much restricted because of ongoing conservation work, they were willing to contribute to the ongoing projects, or there's no problem of contributing to the project. And also, because these species this was rare for so long time, many people had no direct contact with the species, but they kind of consider the species as a heritage from their grandparents, because they have heard stories from their grandmothers or grandfathers. That was an interesting aspect, way to realize that. And after each visit, we also try to summarize what they have been doing. And this also gave me the opportunity to visit so many sites in Myanmar, get in contact with local people, understand their needs, understand the local habitat of the species, and as well as meet too many nature conservationists and conservation scientists in Myanmar. And after all these projects, then comes the other question, like, there are ecologists in Myanmar, there are nature conservationists in Myanmar, but why haven't they been doing this work that I have been doing in Myanmar by themselves? And the answer for that was lack of facilities. To provide some facilities that were lacking there, and also to bring the know-how that we have built up, that we have come up with during my PhD, we initiated a project with my local collaborators in Myanmar to basically have a seminar for the nature conservationists in Myanmar to come together and discuss what we have doing in the country, and also to come up with do-it-yourself molecular laboratory in one of the universities, and give students there who have been working on ecology and nature conservation for their thesis to explain the equipments and how can they incorporate those equipment into their thesis, and also have some volunteer students from the university and bring them to our field sites. And the field site, they could meet secondary school students and bring a portable microscope with them, show them how to distinguish plant and animal cells under a microscope and where DNA is found in those cells, and what the DNA or genetic diversity mean, and what we have been doing in there, different turtle species in Myanmar, and turtle conservation projects going on in the region. By doing that, we actually managed to diffuse the scientific knowledge in different educational bodies through Myanmar. And this was actually the first time that I got involved in National Geographic community. And we still are in contact with my collaborators or university students there. But unfortunately, because of political situation in Myanmar right now, they are distressed. And if you are interested in to learn more about what's going on in the country, you can actually search for hashtag what's happening in Myanmar. Currently, as I said, and Joe also introduced me as, I'm a postdoctoral research at University of Zurich. And my topic here is on the population and conservation genomics of Aldabra giant tortoises. Aldabra giant tortoises, together with Galapagos giant tortoises, are one of the 2 giant tortoise species left in the world, and their natural distribution restricted in Aldabra atoll. Although there are several giant tortoise species in Western Indian Ocean islands, they're all extinct. So Aldabra giant tortoises are the only remaining ones in the region. And they have been successfully used in several rewilding programs. By rewilding programs, I mean these individuals, these animals were actually sent to other habitats, the degraded habitats, and they could actually substitute their extinct counter species. So they basically substitute their ecological roles and then help resurrect degraded ecosystems in the region. So the idea was, previous work on the genetics of Aldabra giant tortoises were done with a handful of molecular markers, and they were inconclusive. And my work basically is about using a different approach, which looks at the whole genome for many individuals and to have a more in-depth idea about the genetic variation of the individuals. We need such information, again, to understand how genetic variation is partitioned in natural habitats and how we can actually manage this variation when it comes to rewilding programs or when it comes to the conservation of the species. This information is important because during rewilding, we basically introduced several individuals from a large population, right? So managing the variation so that the introduced population would represent what is left in the wild is quite important. In addition to that, I recently went to Mauritius for my fieldwork because when we introduce several individuals in the wild, we kind of assume that these individuals will mate randomly, so the genetic variation will be retained. But in general, this is not the case. And we have no idea about the breeding system of the species. To understand the breeding system, I basically sampled newly born tortoises in Mauritius, and I will basically do some parentage analysis for them and to understand, in one nest, how many fathers were there, how many breeding females mated with how many males, is there any male dominance, and etc., etc. So all the information that we're going to gain from this project will actually help us to more effectively manage future rewilding or future introduction programs. Another program that I'm involved recently, have been working on recently, is to understand the age, estimate the chronological age of Aldabra giant tortoises. This is important because by knowing the age of individuals, we can also model the dynamics of their populations. We could model the dynamics of wild populations and understand how evolutionary mechanisms played a role into their current genetic variation or population structure. Plus, we could also do this same model, same approach, use the same approach to plan for wilding programs. And also, this is important for the welfare of the individuals as well. To know how old they are will also mean that how we should care for them. And also, Aldabra giant tortoises are one of the oldest known land vertebrates, and that would be super cool if you could estimate the age. So one could ask why you could estimate age of these individuals with molecular tools. Cannot you do any other thing to understand this? Well, for tortoises, this is not the case. We have no non-invasive or non-harmful method to estimate the age of the Aldabra giant tortoise. There's no phenotypic cues. And how we can do now is basically by looking at their genomes and several patterns on the genome and correlate this pattern with the known age of some individuals and build an age clock model for the species. And by using this model, we could also estimate the age of the ones in the wild, in their wild populations. So all in all, what I have been trying to do for this threatened turtles is I try to find cheap, feasible, and depending on the situation, rapid way of incorporating genetic and genomic aspects on the real world conservation programs of these turtle species. And in addition to that, I also like and would love to do in the future as well, that to bring scientific capacity and know-how to the places that I work, so that our circle of nature conservation group would enlarge, and then these genomic tools that I came up with could be used by anybody who would really like to use, especially for the conservation of these populations and species. But of course, this is not, all these case studies that I mentioned could not be done without the help of my collaborators and the funders. I am thankful to all of them. And I also would like to thank you for your kind attention.
All right. Well, perfect slide to end off on with our Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think still popular to this day. I remember growing up and having all those action figures. So that brings me to the first question is, turtles, what led you to want to get into this field and start researching turtles and looking at ways to kind of preserve those populations?
That's a great question. So the issue is, when I tell people that I spent last 8-9 years of mine to conserve some turtle species, people tend to assume that I have some previous story behind, like, from my childhood or any other special interest in reptiles or turtles before. But in fact, I didn't have any. I worked with brown bears, honeybees, deer, several other different animal group before. And when I started my PhD, I just wanted to use my molecular background to nature conservation project. I didn't have any particular animal group in mind, but my PhD supervisor kind of listed the projects that he had at that time. And I basically picked Myanmar instead of turtles. And then it started. Because they have fascinating life histories. As a geneticist, I am super interested in turtles right now, but at the very beginning, I basically picked Myanmar.
Hey, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's no right or wrong way to get into science.
Sure.
You don't know where your career is going to take you. And kind of being open to trying new things, being curious, and look where it's led you. You've visited some amazing places. You've got to work with some iconic species like the Aldabra giant tortoises, so not too bad of a choice.
Exactly.
All right. Well, what I loved about the projects that you shared with us, particularly the first project, is you attacked it from every angle. So not just the science side of things, then you went out and brought the community in, and then you worked to bring some of the local conservationists into the project as well. So this approach is obviously been successful. Is this something that you've been able to share with other research projects and other organizations?
So the issue is, I think one of the downsides of being a geneticist and doing nature conservation is sometimes you tend not to go to field that often.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if somebody brings your samples to you, you could basically do your work in the lab and in front of a computer, and then you could publish or share your results. It's okay. I was lucky because my collaborators in Myanmar there were so willing to host me in Myanmar. And every time I go to Myanmar, I tend to get in contact with like too many people and tend to understand the roots of the problem there in terms of nature conservation. So we came up with more questions, more possibilities. So we worked really tight, and our main goal was to just solve those problems as soon as possible, and incorporate science-driven proofs or information as much as we can. And when I mentioned turtle conservation team, I mean nature conservationists, scientists or field staff, NGOs, former government of Myanmar, too many people with different backgrounds. And from Singapore side, I also had many people like social scientists interested in this project. We all know that if we want to solve a complex problem, we have to come up with different angles. We have to come together and work together. That was our main drive.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a situation right now where we're losing species. We're losing them fast. In some cases, we're losing them before we even know they existed. But what you're doing is so important, is adding this piece to conservation where we look at the populations we have left of some species, which are actually really small in many cases, and making sure that the right individuals are being used to further these populations. And so I wonder what advice you would have for somebody who's maybe starting their science career and maybe hasn't looked at conservation from this angle before. What advice would you give them to approach this field?
So I would advise for a person who would be interested in conservation genetics or genomics in general, my main advice would be, for them to think as practical as possible. Because as I said, theoretically, everything could look fine on paper. You could come up with a list of individuals and you can say, yes, this individual could go this way. But sometimes things don't work like that. My main advice would be, it also depends on the projects. There is no I don't have a solid advice, but I would say, not looking from a single perspective into of any conservation related problem, because usually the problem is not that easy. If the problem is not easy, then we cannot solve it by looking with only one single direction. And genetics is a small component of many conservation studies. That is why it is hard to do applied conservation genetics. It tends to stay on paper. It tends to stay theoretical. And because it's expensive, too costly in many ways, it is really hard to show the applicable part of it. So my advice would be meet lots of people, have lots of local collaborators, and be interested in other aspects of the conservation problem, so that people could also think in more practical ways, or how to translate their scientific findings into a solution in the real world.
Awesome. Great advice. And that kind of leads to our final question here. We have another question here via YouTube. And this person is wondering, are you still in touch with that team in Myanmar? How are things going with that project?
Yeah, I am. Well, regarding the project, I can say that after the reintroduction, we okay, let's say before the reintroduction, we couldn't get fertilized eggs for several breeding seasons. But after reintroduction, we started to get fertilized eggs, and we kind of speculated that this could be because of the effects of reintroduction, effects of males into the gene pool of the population. So after several years, we were really hopeful about these reintroductions. But currently, I can tell the captive conservation of the populations have been going stable, but I am not sure if they're planning several other new reintroductions in the region given the political situation right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another aspect to think about is you may have those kind of stable genetic populations, but then is it the right time, the right conditions to be furthering the project, right? So another thing to consider, and why it's so important to have those stable populations in places like the Singapore Zoo. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Ghazali, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, for joining year 2 of the Women Blaze Trails Festival. I'm going to share your handles here on social media. There they are. If people would like to follow along, learn more about the work that you are doing. And I'm so excited that you're doing work. I saw Luke's name there in the Aldabra research. So I'm so excited that you're doing work with that amazing team. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to connect on an event somewhere down the line, maybe even from the field.
Maybe, hopefully. Thank you very much for the invitation, Joe. It was so nice for me to be here. I was so excited to contribute to this fantastic festival and hope to meet you somewhere else.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to that. Have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya. Thank you. All right. Well, things are just moving right along. The day is flying by. So many great women from all over the world we've been meeting. And so from Europe, we're going to head to Africa now, and actually out into the bush, which is kind of cool. I'm so excited about the next speaker we have joining us. I'm just going to change my background here to make it a little more appropriate. This is great. Youth is so important. We've shared, we've had so many stories from scientists and explorers sharing their stories, sharing stories of, living in the mountains and people not understanding why they wanted to go to a career in the ocean, to being in school and teachers kind of trying to take students' minds off of their goals of conservation to something maybe more realistic like literature. And that's not what we need to see happening, which is why I'm so excited. I get to see youth all the time who are passionate about our planet, about what's happening to our planet, and who aren't waiting till they're an adult to make a difference. So I'm going to bring in our next speaker, but I want to give her a nice introduction first. We have Gabby Sikora joining us. She is a 13-year-old young lady from South Africa with a huge passion for wildlife photography and conservation. So she won the overall junior creative arts category at Talent Africa in 2021, which is pretty darn impressive. She joins us today to talk about fulfilling her dream of bringing all young wildlife photographers in Southern Africa together through their shared passion for wildlife photography and conservation. So she's actually on a little trip right now. She's out in the bush, but she's taken some time to join us, which is so cool. Gabby, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks. And you, Joe, how are you? I'm
good. It is great to see you. Before we even launch into anything, I want to know how it's going so far. What have you been getting up to? What have you seen?
So far, the last 2 days have been pretty quiet. But this afternoon we had lions right next to the road, got some incredible photos, which is amazing. So yeah, today was a pretty good day. Very excited.
Sounds like a pretty good day. I'm excited for you. I have a feeling after this event, things are going to go into overdrive and you're going to have lots of great encounters, which will be awesome.
Yes, hoping I have very good luck, yeah.
All right. Well, Gabby, it's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us. You're doing some really great work bringing youth together and getting them excited and giving them a platform to share their passion. So I'm going to hide myself backstage. I've got a few videos queued up. You let me know when you'd like me to play them, but I'm going to let you take over the show for a little bit.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Joe. And thank you for this incredible opportunity to be able to speak with you all here today. It is both an honor and a privilege to, at my young age, be invited to such a prestigious event. My story is a short one, in as much that I've only a few years' experience as a teenager, but one thing is certain, my mind is constantly active, and there is still a lot more to come. So whilst I'm introducing myself, I would like to run a short video clip from my journey growing up whilst visiting my second home, the bush. So Joe, if you wouldn't mind, please sharing the first video now. So before I jump into telling you all about my initiative, here is my story. My name is Gabby Sakura. I'm just 13 years old and I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. We have lived our lives in the city, but tried to escape to the bush as frequently as possible. My journey into photography began at the tender age of just 6 years old. I would eagerly snap at anything and everything when the opportunity arose. The images may not have been too well composed and were very likely all rather blurry, but still, in my eye at the time, they were of award-winning quality to me. I kept at it and never gave up, always willing to take constructive criticism and learn something new. So in 2020, when our lives dramatically changed with the rise of this dreadful pandemic that shook the world, my life too took on many changes. We as children were now expected to do schooling from home with teachers on our screens. I actually loved it and thrived. It was in 2021 that we as a family made the decision for me to start homeschooling officially under Cambridge International. The flexibilities of this opened a great many windows of opportunity for me, as I was now the keeper of my own time. As well as keeping up with my own schoolwork, I completed my first year as a SANParks Junior Honorary Ranger, a 5-year course in conservation within our national parks under the guidance of qualified Senior Honorary Rangers. I also completed the first grading of the Junior FAGASA course, FAGASA meaning Field Guides Association of South Africa. This association sets the standard and level of professionalism and skills development within the tourism industry. I will be continuing my journey into the next phase in each of these organizations during the course of this year. Having more flexibility also means that we can now visit more of South Africa's greatest game parks and wilderness areas in order to view and capture some of nature's incredible moments. Schooling has now become a pleasure, and I am so eager to achieve the highest possible grades required for becoming a wildlife veterinarian one day. It has been a goal and aspiration since I was merely 4 years old. I continue daily to work at this dream and already see the end goal in sight, albeit only in a few years from now. So whilst growing into my teenage years came the inevitable introduction into social media. At first a little daunting, it soon became apparent that I definitely did not want to advocate myself across social media platforms, and rather look at what I can do to help improve the lives of others. I began my Instagram photography page with a view to showing some of my incredible bush experiences. Ultimately, what I would like to do is show the beauty of nature to the people that cannot experience it firsthand. Bearing in mind, before you can do anything to make a change, you first have to be passionate about something. And this is where I hope my photography and my vision will lead me. I truly am all about nature, conservation, and capturing those memories and moments through photography. I was rather shocked to find that Instagram was already abuzz with so many aspiring photographers around my age. I began chatting to many of these people, some who had merely liked my photography, and others who were happy to guide me on improving my skills. These young photographers soon became good friends. all sharing one passion: photographing nature's wonders. I have huge concerns about the preservation of our last remaining wilderness areas and the future of it all. And it was then that the idea struck me. With the help of my mom, who is always supporting me and guiding me in making decisions that not every 13-year-old young lady is often faced with, I drafted my plan. We all photograph nature, right? And so, I wanted to, or more like needed to, bring young like-minded photographers together, because together we can make a difference. I pitched the idea to my friend group. Some were in full support, while others merely said that it was destined to fail. Having faith, I did not give up, but rather decided to take this huge leap alone. I set to work, messaging anyone who to me looked to be a likely candidate. In June 2021, the Young Wildlife Photographers of Southern Africa group was born. Today we are proud to have an incredible 285 members and have young photographers still wishing to join on almost a daily basis. One cannot imagine how photography in the youth of South Africa is growing. We are so proud to say that our youngest member, Ethan Vlegar, was only 9 years old when he joined our group. With most 23 to 24-year-olds still being students, we engage with them too. Our ages are therefore set from 8 to 25 years old. Photography is not a school subject in SA, and such, members will invariably take up the hobby at very different ages. I actually frequently receive messages from adults, some even close to 50 years old, asking if they may join, as they have shown an eagerness to learn from us. But we just feel that this would take away from the initiative of focusing on young wildlife photographers. So like I said earlier, my mind is constantly filled with ideas, and so new features are constant within this growing community. But essentially, the YWP is for getting to know one another, to help one another improve our photography skills, and to support each other on our own individual journeys through our photography and conservation efforts. Lasting bonds, friendships, and even relationships have been formed. What I did not expect was for professionals within the industry to already notice us and reach out. Today, we have a couple of professional photographic safari guides on the group who encourage members daily, imparting on us their invaluable knowledge. So we are all about being interactive and engaging, and as such introduced some key features. One such feature is our weekly photo challenges. Each theme brings with it a special opportunity for members to send through images pertaining to the theme. With our latest theme, inspired by the book that I'm currently reading by Lawrence Anthony, The Last Rhinos, we hope to set the mindset of our members that if we do not become actively involved in conservation efforts soon, these images will be the images that indeed captured the last rhinos. If we do not conserve our wildlife and their dying habitats, we will no longer have the incredible photographic opportunities that we have today. Every member has at least one story or experience to speak of, be it one that have everyone in fits of laughter, like one member's tale of literally being caught with his pants down, staring into the eyes of a Mozambican spitting cobra, to the more serious and heartsore ones, like the telling of rescuing an orphaned rhino calf whose mom fell at the hands of terrible poachers. We'd love to hear from them all. For the purpose of having members' stories heard, we created a storytime feature to allow members to share all their bush experiences with us and the wider community on our Instagram platform. Many of our members have received some high-profile awards within photography, and we are extremely proud of each one. Sky Mika is the grand title holder for the Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year Award 2018. He has been invited to speak at various events, most notably as a guest speaker in the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in 2019. Kathan Moore, who is currently 18 years old, won the Benjamin Mpaka African Youth Photographer of the Year Award in 2021. Danielle Abrahams featured in the top 100 Africa Geographic Photo Competition in 2021. Mark Haystack and Justin Ponder both hold the BirdLife South Africa Owlet Award for 2021. So in our wildlife photography community, we have many members who are very new to the hobby, and so one of our more experienced members hosts a tips and tricks feature, offering a general guideline of the many basics that are often overlooked when starting on a photographic journey. Perhaps my very favorite feature is something that we call a star segment. These are very interactive Zoom calls held with specialists within the photographic and nature fields. I seek out professionals and leaders that have made a massive impression on us as the youth and engage with them. This has been so well received, and we have a really long lineup of guest speakers eager to share their knowledge and in turn learn how they can get involved in helping us as the YWP spread the word of who we are and what we would like to achieve. Our main goal being becoming recognized as a leader in youth photography and most certainly conservation. It was through my last star segment that I was truly blessed to have met and interviewed Beverly and Derek Hubert, National Geographic Explorers at Large, who you may already be familiar with. If not, Derek and Beverly are globally known conservationists and filmmakers who have been working to save wildlife and their habitats for over 30 years now. They are without a doubt my greatest inspirations, and I will be forever grateful for them instilling the hungry need to want to get involved in conservation, both in me and I know a good many of our members too. Beverly and Derek, if you are watching this evening, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you do in conservation, and may you continue to inspire so many more of our youth as you have me. So there are so many things that we offer, and so many more ideas we would like to introduce, and putting photography to one side for a moment, none are more important than where we wish to soon place our main focus, and this is the one of conservation. Right now, we need to heed the call of our more senior counterparts and get involved in as much as what we can. We plan for our efforts to be initially focused on exploring ways on how our members can become actively involved in helping with conservation matters and climate change within Southern Africa. We hope to set up provincial projects with ecologically aligned foundations and NPOs. And it goes without saying that we will continue to encourage our members to take their photography further, and in doing so, applying their voices for our wildlife. We, the YWP, would like to eventually partner with global organizations to ensure the protection of the world's wildlife and our Earth. Now, I've compiled a video containing images and videos to brag a little, if you will, of the incredible talent coming from our wildlife photography members. I hope you enjoy this, and please bear in mind whilst watching that these photographers range from only 9 years old to 25.
sinking low, scatterings and fugitives, hooded eyes and weary brows, seek refuge in the night. They are the scatterings of Africa, each uprooted one. They're on the road to Bellamanga, where the world began. I love the scatterings of Africa, each and every one. In their hearts a burning hunger, beneath the copper sun. Broken wall, bicycle wheel, African song forging, still singing. Magic machine cannot match human being, human being. African ideas, African ideas, make the future clear, make the future clear. They are the scatterings of Africa, each uprooted one. They're on the road to Bellamanga, where the world began. And for the scatterings of Africa, the journey has begun. Future find their hungry eyes beneath the copper sun.
Thank you so much. So yeah, as you can see, we have some really incredible photographers, and we range from the young ages, and we are the youth. We are the next generation, and that's why we need the most support we can get, because like I said, we are the next generation. And in saying that, there are so many people who now stand in support of me and pursuing my ultimate goal. My parents and family, Luke, my boyfriend, who is as passionate about all of this as am I, the group admins, and by no means least, the group members. I thank each and every one for sticking by me and allowing me to make a meaningful difference, one new member at a time. I thank you, the viewers, for taking the time today to listen to my story. And Joe, thank you for affording me this incredible opportunity that will pave the way forward for myself and the wonderful members of Young Wildlife Photographers of Southern Africa Group.
All right. Well, Gabby, thank you so much. What a great message. It was great to see where your passion for conservation came from. And then that showcase, that highlight reel of members from 9 to 25 sharing their amazing photography, their amazing videos from the field. Wow, the future of wildlife photography in Southern Africa is in great shape. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you, Joe.
So Gabby, I want to start here because what I get really excited to see is that people like yourself are realizing that to get excited, to empower people, you don't have to wait until you're an adult. So when did you know, when did you feel that you had to do something to bring the youth together to share that message of conservation through photography?
So, the first time I was in nature, I think I was 5 weeks old. My parents took me to Kruger National Park. I was 5 weeks old. And ever since then, they've just instilled this burning passion inside of me to get out into nature. And looking at the statistics nowadays of the rhino poaching and the rhinos decreasing, it's very demotivating because I'm fortunate enough to live in this incredible place in the world. And I feel us as the youth, like I said, are the next generation. And we have to do something to conserve the beautiful nature around us. And I'd say, since I was very young, I just had this burning passion inside of me that we had to do something. If I want my grandchildren to see everything that lies around us, the beautiful, everything that ranged from the birds to the big mammals, absolutely everything. If we want our children to see that one day, we have to make a difference. We have to make that happen.
All right. And so this brings me to another important question is there's other youth around the world who would probably love to bring together those in their community, those in their country, maybe in Europe, in South America, things like that. So what advice would you give to someone maybe hoping to start a community the way that you have?
The advice that I would give, be open to constructive criticism. I think the best way to learn is to really listen to what people around you want and don't want. So don't just have a block against everything and say, oh no, you don't like my work. I'm not going to have you in any of my videos or something like that. I'm not going to feature you. I'm not going to put you in the daily features, nothing like that. If you have an open mind about it and really take in the constructive criticism, I think that's how you learn. That's how you will maybe make a great group. So yeah, just have an open mind and don't have a block against other people's constructive criticism.
All right. That is some amazing advice, some excellent advice. You clearly are gaining all kinds of amazing skills, learning to be out in the field, photography, and things like that. I wonder, what advice would you give to someone who's just kind of getting started with a camera for the first time? It's amazing that we're able to use these digital cameras, take so many great photos, amazing technology like the zooms and touching up pictures afterward with Photoshop. What advice would you give to someone just getting into the photography world?
So the advice that I would give is also have an open mind. Also go onto Instagram. Something that really helped me is go onto Instagram, go onto social media. The internet is an amazing place nowadays. And go onto Instagram, go onto social media and look. So let's say you want to, whether you live in America, whether you live in South Africa, Kruger National Park, for example, go look at a few images from there and really look and learn at how you can get an image like that. Like, just learn from that. And I had a star segment, a feature, with Jerry van Volt, a South African safari guide. And he really taught me a very valuable lesson when you're in the field. What is your why? Are you photographing for Instagram? Are you photographing for social media? So for likes, for followers? That's not the right reason. I had a person the other day that said, if it's not for posting on Instagram, I don't know why I'm doing it. They're purely doing it for the followers and likes and to get reach and get out there. But I don't feel like that's the right, motivation, how you should push forward. Your reason should be you have a love for nature, you have a love for photography, you have a love for wilderness, and you want to go capture those incredible moments in the field and experiences. So really, what is your why? And ask yourself that, and it will make a tremendous difference in your photography, I believe.
All right. Well, Gabby, very impressive. What an amazing community you've brought together. I can't wait to see where it leads. I hope I get to see some of the photos from your current time out in the bush. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I'll share, I came across your Instagram. Is there a better spot or a link that I can share if people want to check out some more work from the group?
Yes, there's a Young Wildlife Photographers at Southern Africa Instagram. So it's Young Wildlife _photographers_SA. Yeah. And that's our Instagram where we try and feature all our members. So that's a range of all our members' photography together on one Instagram platform.
All right, excellent. Well, Gabby, again, it was a pleasure to host you. Thank you so much for joining year 2 of the Women Blaze Trails Festival. Enjoy the rest of your time in the bush, and I look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Joe, and all the very best with the rest of the program.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you.
All right. Well, what a talented photographer and what a talented group of photographers she's pulling together from across Southern Africa. So our next event is going to be a really good one. I'm excited. I've been following Rebecca Hoy's work from a distance, and we've just managed to connect in the last couple of weeks. Rebecca Hoy is the founder of Roots Studio, which aims to reverse cultural appropriation into celebration. Rebecca is a Forbes 30 Under 30 member, a Cartier Women's Initiative laureate, Chanel Foundation recipient, and Echoing Green Fellow. She began her journey as a Fulbright scholar and National Geographic explorer, documenting human-animal coexistence from rural to urban societies. So take in this interview her and I did this week, and then we'll see you very shortly.
Everyone, my name is Rebecca Hoy. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm so excited to be sharing our story today. I'm the founder of a social enterprise called Roots Studio, which looks at bridging rural and indigenous communities globally into the fashion and retail markets. One of the first questions I always get is how I ended up on this journey. Now, if I were to really peel it back, it started more than 10 years ago when I just graduated from college. I was coming out with a urban planning and business double degree, but I had hated my business degree so much, so I ran as far as possible away from that background as I could. I went all the way to India on a Fulbright right after college, where I was studying human-animal coexistence and how rural communities versus urban communities were reacting to these human-animal and wildlife coexistence questions. Over the few years, though, I think staying out in India, I became so attached to understanding more and more about what's happening in these rural areas, but I was also very aware of these disparities. And I was also asking myself, what is my role in all this? So as a naive expat would do, you would look at building a school. Except, the school that we wanted to build in this cluster of villages in West Bengal was a school on wheels, mostly because a lot of the reasons why rural students couldn't attain education was because of just how far they lived from the urban center. So we got a 50-seater Mahindra bus, and then we decided to decorate it with as a giant owl because owls were significant to this cluster of villages in West Bengal that we were working in. We put it together, and then we called it the Toto Express. We hired a few teachers to start teaching out of it. It serviced and ran an after-school program across 4 high schools, in 4 elementary and also high schools in the Bardhaman district of West Bengal. But over the few months, I think this was a time period where I thought, I was doing something, but it was actually profoundly changing my perspectives on what impact education and urbanization actually meant. This is a peculiarly interesting statue that was sitting on top of one of the schools that we were teaching out of. And it's an image that we're pretty familiar with, the evolution of man. The first half is something that we've seen. It's the monkey going up, standing up and becoming an upright man. But after that, there's a progression where the man is then coming back down, hunched over a computer, typing away. And if statues are what we monumentalize as where we want to go, this is a very interesting statue to be found in the school, especially in a region where it was a Wi-Fi dead zone, and I had not seen a computer within 40 kilometers of the area. As we were also running this program, a lot of teachers started to report back to me that it was really hard to teach the English and maths because a lot of the indigenous students were too shy and they weren't picking it up quick enough. But I found this idea that they were too shy to be surprising, because when the children engaged in music and dance, they were not shy at all. This 7-year-old Santali girl, she was told by her teachers that she couldn't pass the first standard because she was learning too slow. But when she danced, I just wanted a recruiter from Juilliard to be able to see just how brilliant she was. She was not shy at all, incredibly talented. When you look back at what audacity and what boldness looks like in a lot of rural communities, it comes in the form of dancing, music, paintings, craft work. Because for many generations, they communicated through these different forms that we often impose and say, and we overlook when we're trying to enforce one form of what education or brilliance looks like. This fundamentally changed my theory of understanding what this closing the disparity looked like through imposing our idea of what education and urban mobility looks like, and instead asking, how do we formalize the brilliance, the skills, the creativity that exists there, and create revenue streams forward so that it could form a prosperous village. You have villages where it's not, you don't pass down silver or gold and you buy that from Tiffany's during significant rites of passage. It's handlooms that were passed down through generations of generations between mother and daughter. Or you don't simply just go to West Elm to buy something from the store. Everything in the kitchen is hand woven and made and grown. The colors, the purples, dependent on the seeds of that season, or the leaves from a tea, or the bark of a tree. But over and over again, as I was spending more time working and learning with these communities, is that they simply can't often call themselves an artist because it doesn't make money and people aren't able to see the creativity behind it. This gentleman, Kuldeep, is a tractor driver, but at night he would paint these paintings and he would not show them to people because he just didn't really see or understand how people perceive the value behind these paintings. So I asked myself, if that fundamental question of valuing these incredible traditions, these craft skills, the artistry is also a function of being paid for it. Well, I was darn sure that these artists could get paid for it. How do we bypass these complex supply chains? How do we bypass the discrimination that happens in these communities and then bring wealth from markets that would so deeply appreciate these designs and the knowledge they have, and then bring that wealth back into the community. So that helped me bring me back to this question of how we can how can we capture all this creative abundance. But on a personal side, it was a very humbling journey, realizing that, you know, passion doesn't feed people. And when you're trying to figure out how to take the struggling out of artists, we had to put together the side of a business model that can create the solution. So I then dusted up. I returned to my, dusty knowledge of accounting and finance that I thought I had put away, and realized, we can put a well-oiled, executed business model behind this and be able to get these artists recognized and also paid. And that simply, passion doesn't just feed people. We can channel what we've seen, the injustices and the brokenness, through value creation. So little by little, I put together a business model of how do we think about bridging communities, how do we bring more beauty into the global markets, and do so in an equitable way. Even going as far as, launching the Root Studio at places like TechCrunch Disrupt to increase the proverbial pie of wealth for so many talented, brilliant creators that are often never represented when we think about the creative economy. And in the process, meeting the best people who also care deeply about this type of bridging work. People who are leaders of the communities, and also know how precious and amazing the work and the talent is. And also people on the market side who understand that there's so much homogeneity, and how can we break through that and bring a unique and fresh perspective. And so over the years, we have found that so much of the work in the messy but beautiful process of bridging, there's 3 key pillars in our work. The first is respect. Respect is about recognizing the voices, the names, and giving credit where credit is due. This woman, Birabai, is from Madhya Pradesh. She had migrated out of her village because she needed to find additional income to her farming practice. But when she moved into the city, she could not get any jobs. She was highly discriminated for her tribal status. She had tattoos on her face that were part of a matrilineal tradition of women in the village tattooing one another during significant rites of passage. But when she was cutting grass at a lawn, which was the first daily wage job that she got, she saw people painting and took the same visual traditions as a tattoo artist and started developing her own paintings. Really excited that last spring we were able to launch a collection featuring her artwork on a West Coast brand, but not only just the artwork on the product. There was a full feature about her life journey, her story, an interview about her perspectives and the meaning behind her artwork, giving her authorship behind this product line. The second pillar in bridging is reciprocity. When you're bridging cultures together across oceans, across geographies, it's really important to have both sides understand what's happening and to create consent in the process. This is a community from Maharashtra. There's probably fewer than 50 artists remaining. They have these incredible walls across the village where traditionally they have drawn stories that depict a day out in the farm, or folklore and different stories. And now that, because the village being in such close proximity to the city of Mumbai has started to change and urbanize a lot. And this is an art form that is trying to find its way in terms of greater visibility. The artists themselves have already started readapting these house paintings onto canvas, mixing, cow dung and white rice as the paste, and then traveling to the city to sell their works. But oftentimes it's a very labor-intensive process. we saw, there's so much beauty in the motifs that they were drawing. And these artists were definitely looking for additional ways to have their work represented. But because these designs are sacred, they can't just go on anything. They expressed to us, we don't want any of these motifs showing up on products that touch the feet or in the groin area. So when we represented and bridged them to this brand, we made sure that those concerns were expressed. We also made sure that as designers came up with CAD files, we would send that back to the artisan communities for their approval. And so when a collaboration came together, it was built on reciprocity and consent, and it can create something that's really beautiful, but is founded on a respectful foundation. And lastly, remuneration, which is probably one of the key levers to thinking about this theory of a prosperous village. In the same community, it can take 4 to 6 weeks for an artist to develop a painting that they would then travel all the way to the city to sell one time, maybe for like $100 to $200. It's a very labor intensive process, but we said, there's so much that's already even in one corner of this painting. What happens if we can digitize and license that? So that design was licensed to an American brand called Outdoor Research. They licensed it across a number of products, and it was a huge hit. From the marketing team told us it was, the hoodie on the right was, very much sold out within a few months. But from that sales process, we also were able to return a large injection of capital back to the community, not just to one artist, but as a dividend to all of the participating artists as they wished. Whether that's a dividend that they can use for each of their households, or it could be a community fund where they decide, that can be used for workshops, materials for their artwork, or even infrastructure upgrades in their own community. So this is a process that we've been able to do over and over again through the foundations of respect, reciprocity, and remuneration. And after all these years, we really look back at when you're when you're looking to create social impact or change, it's always a windy process, but we know that we're directionally trying to bend towards the direction. But that comes a lot, again, with the fundamental principles of respect, reciprocity, and remuneration. We don't always get it right? Just like from the bus days. But as long as we keep those pillars in mind and keep grappling and keep readjusting our assumptions, we believe that we can get closer and closer to a world that's bridged, that's more equitable and beautiful. And lastly, not just about our role as a bridge, but being able to pass the mic to the leaders of the communities who have tended towards the land, especially in a moment of crisis that the world is in. So this was at the Business of Fashion Voices Conference last December 2021. And when we got the invitation to speak about our work there, I thought, what better opportunity to pass the mic and for a room of leaders in fashion to hear from a leader of a community who has tended to the land for generations, as a leader, and this is what she had to share.
I mean, you've done such an incredible lifetime of work in gender advocacy, advocating for stewardship of the land. What brought you on this path, and what message do you have for all of us today?
I believe on the principles, the values of respect, compassion, dignity, fairness for myself and for others. And that's the reason why I have taken this path. To be part of the healing process, I think we all need to be part of the healing process. To be part of, this changing scenario, especially in times of climate change, in times of pandemic, it is important for us to pause a while to listen to our own heartbeats and also to listen to the heartbeat of the land that you are standing, to breathe the air, to breathe the water, to feel the heartbeat of our planet is important. And I think this is the moment that we have all come here for that reason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's exactly why we bridge. In a world that is increasingly siloed, where there's travel restrictions, and sometimes the media projects a message that makes us more divided than united, we all just have to remember that we're sharing the same planet together. And there are so many incredible communities with cultures formed over many generations, and they have such a valuable perspective to share on this planet that we all live on. Thank you.
All right. Rebecca, thank you so much for sharing with us today. That was a great presentation. Thanks for taking us on a little bit of your journey. We always hear about in the media about losing wild places, losing species and things like that. And of course, that's very important to think about. But I think what we forget sometimes is how we're losing languages, we're losing culture. And that if we're able to protect languages and protect cultures, that's going to go a long way to protecting these wild places, because 80% of our biodiversity is under the stewardship of Indigenous people. So I think it's so great how you're giving a real voice and a platform to preserving the culture and preserving, this way of life. And I wonder, did you kind of approach it from that perspective as well? You saw those kind of ties to nature and how important culture is?
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we think about wildlife conservation and urbanization, we often think in our minds about, pristine spaces and clean boundaries to protect a certain area. But that's often not the case, and not how a lot of these protected areas were ever they had ever existed. In fact, there's so many communities, especially Indigenous communities, that have lived in these spaces and have seen the wildlife and coexisted with the wildlife for many generations, right? One particular example of this is, during my time many years ago, when I was doing more work on human-animal coexistence that actually segued into Root Studio. I was in Mumbai, and there's a park called Sanjay Gandhi National Park, which is one of the largest forest cities or city forests that exists. And if you look at satellite imagery, you have this incredibly pristine, not pristine, but it's got this, round demarcation of where the park is. And then all around it is incredibly dense urban development all around it. The park also has one of the highest density of leopards that live there. And in recent times, you have these leopards showing up on the cameras of high rises, hanging out in elevators and stairs. But it's also created a lot of conflict when something happens where someone may have gone attacked by a leopard, and how do we think about this form of coexistence and an incredibly urbanized area living amongst leopards. In particular, there was an Indigenous community that was living in this forest, and because of urbanization, they have to look for ways to make additional income. So they were engaged in, leather factories or other forms of, helping develop the buildings around the area. But these are areas that often attract a lot of the leopards. So we thought, actually a lot of these communities have this incredible art practice, and that's a viable form of income. If we're able to maybe support that artistic practice, that would be a way so that they don't have to rely on these alternative sources of income in order to be able to stay exactly where they're at. So anyways, this kind of just goes to show it's a much more nuanced and complex situation when we're talking about humans in these areas and biodiversity, and how do we create solutions for it rather than just drawing boundaries. Yeah.
All right. So, that brings me to think about the brands, right? You mentioned that you've approached brands like brands in the US, and there's been these great campaigns and they've been really successful. So what do you think is driving that demand for materials, from these places like India and Syria and places that you've been able to visit? And how do you approach a brand in the first place for a partnership like this?
Yeah. I think, when we're looking at fashion, you go to any store, you're going to see the word sustainability appear over and over again, almost to the point we don't even know what that word fully means anymore. Because every brand's like, we got to figure this out, right? And, we might laugh about that, but I think there's something underlying there that is important, which is that no matter where we're at, whether we're in the United States, whether we're in India, whether we're in China or Syria, there's a fundamental human desire to heal and also to return a little bit more to this form of care and nurture, right? Especially in a world that's sort of on fire right now. And so, of course, you have these brands who are also trying to do that in their own way. But oftentimes the way they approach it is either what we call appropriative, right? So they take these concepts, either Ayurveda or these Eastern concepts that exist for generations, and they try to package it, right? And I think fundamentally, when I saw that, there's huge outcries, which is why we have this whole term around cultural appropriation. And I thought to myself, like, now brands are really scared from a lot of brands don't want to end up appropriating, right? But if we live in a world that's more homogenous, that's not going to create a world that is more understanding and also more beautiful. What if we allowed these communities who have so much knowledge around sustainability, so much knowledge around culture and creativity, actually author these collaborations? So I would say that's really one of the kind of core philosophies when we think about why bridging is important. And in terms of, in the past, when we started talking to brands, at first it took them, some time to understand that. But now with the collections that we've launched that have been so successful, the brands most of them have continued collections for at least 3 years.
Wow.
To create that continuity with the communities that we work with. And yeah, we're just getting a lot of other brands coming to us now as a result. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great experience to be able to spend some time with Rebecca and collect those stories and be able to share the work that she's doing through Root Studio. If you would like to follow along, here are a couple spots you can. Rebecca's Twitter there, handle is at the bottom. Her Instagram as well for Root Studio is there. So please do take a look at those social sites and follow along. And then, of course, I want to share the link here to rootstudio.co. So where you can actually see some of the projects, see some of the products, and of course, support the great work that Rebecca is doing. There's a little bit more to that video. We had a little bit longer Q&A. So when I do put the video into the playlist tonight of the full weekend of events, I'll put the full video in where you can see the rest of the great Q&A session that I was able to have with Rebecca. Okay, I can see our next speaker is ready to go backstage. I'm really excited to be hosting Rosa Vasquez Espinoza. She is a Peruvian chemical biologist, a National Geographic explorer. She's an educator, a conservationist, and award-winning artist. She founded the project Micro Amazon, so exploring the microscopic universe of extreme environments and unique animals in the Amazon rainforest to discover new molecules and enzymes for medicine and green chemistry. So I'm going to bring Rosa in with me right now. Hi, Rosa. How are you?
Hi, Joe. Great to see you. Thanks for having me. The festival has been awesome so far.
Excellent. I'm glad you've been able to tune in. It's been just a great week, and I'm so lucky to be able to host this event, to be able to share so many great stories. And I'm even more excited because we're going to take this playlist on Monday, and then we're going to share it out to our community of thousands of educators across North America, and they'll be able to share these stories with their classrooms as well. So it's going to be great.
Yeah, that's definitely super, super exciting.
All right. Well, Rosa, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, share your story, and then we'll have a little Q&A time together.
Sounds great. Let me go ahead and share my screen now. Can you see the screen all right?
Yeah, we're ready. Looks
awesome.
Good.
So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I'm feeling beyond honored to have been invited by Joe to join this Weekends Festival, which just represents a beautiful array of women in science. So my name is Rosa. I'm originally from Peru. And today I'll be telling you a story not only of who I am, how I got where I am right now, but the different exciting projects that I'm part of right now and things that I'm like looking to be more involved with in the future. And this all revolve around the idea of the micro Amazon, the microscopic hidden universe of the Amazon rainforests, worlds that we haven't really fully seen yet and haven't taken into account when we talk about biodiversity of the jungle. But first, let me tell you a little bit about me and why this matters to me and where do I want to take it. As I mentioned, I come from Peru, and originally my family is from a very small town in the high Andes of Peru in the mountains, where they had limited access to not only education, but medicine and hospitals. And here in this photo, I'm with my grandma, who became one of the leaders in her town for using traditional medicine, specifically plants, to treat different conditions whenever they didn't have access to doctors. And she brought all of this knowledge with my family whenever they migrated to the capital, Lima, which is where I was born and raised. And she created a small natural pharmacy in our backyard, where I basically grew up. I grew up learning about what plants she wanted to use to treat whether we had a stomachache, or if we wanted to cook certain things, or if we wanted to dye certain colors and dyes, etc. So I've always been fascinated by not only what nature can achieve in terms of medicine and agriculture and even cosmetics, but what's the science behind it. I had the opportunity to do an internship in China in 2014 in a traditional Chinese medicine hospital, where I saw how deeply involved is traditional medicine in their hospital systems. So you actually had one wing of the traditional Chinese medicine and one wing of their pharmaceutical-based medicine per se, and they were well integrated because they had a lot of scientific research behind the traditional medicine. And I feel like that's something that's missing in a lot of the countries in South America. And something else that how I got from here to the jungle was because by being able to visit different parts of my country since I was 15, I realized how little we know about all of these little nuances and the microscopic world of the jungle. So that led me to want to pursue a career in science. So I moved to the US when I was 18 to pursue a double degree in biochemistry and molecular biology, and recently graduated with my PhD in chemical biology, where I've been focusing on studying natural products that come from nature, specifically from microbes that live in sediment. But as Joe mentioned, I'm also very involved in the arts. I traveled before with dancing competitions and teaching workshops, and now I'm trying to integrate that back into the work I do by being able to highlight the culture behind the communities that we visit and work with. So today I'll tell you a story about the research that I've been involved with, as well as the educational projects and initiatives where we incorporate a lot of the science, but also a lot of the art, and the different communication avenues that I've been pursuing, so that we can all learn more about the jungle from a different perspective. Microbes, why should we care about them? Because a lot of the things I'll be talking to you about today revolve around the idea of microscopic organisms. They're found all around us, whether it's in the soil, in water, in our skin, in our bodies, in plants, in animals, in the air. They're often too small to be seen by the naked eye. And traditionally, they've been super useful in medicine, such as penicillin, but also in food, cosmetics, materials, and more recently, in the last decade, they have been taking a newer role in the conversations around conservation of environments. Often when we've been hearing or talking about conservation, we consider the biodiversity that we can see with our naked eyes. So we're talking about plants, animals. However, the microorganisms are really the basis for everything around us and all of this beautiful life that we get to see with our eyes. So we need to have a stronger consideration of microbes when we talk about conservation, and that's a field that's starting to take more of a role now, but I think we still need more science on that aspect, more efforts on that, specifically when we talk about such a fragile ecosystem such as the Amazon rainforests. Microbes have also had a beautiful role in agriculture, helping us develop less toxic pesticides, for example, in green chemistry, to be able to make medicines that we need in a much cleaner way, as well as bioremediation, cleaning up oil spills or even degrading plastics, which is work that is being carried out by amazing groups of scientists all around the world. And how does the microbes connect with the Amazon rainforest? One of the first times I went to the jungle, I was 15. And I already was introduced on the concept of natural products and medicine coming from nature. And I knew a little bit about microbes. But then when I started to just doing a Google search about, okay, what do we know about the microorganisms in the jungle and what does that mean? I could barely find any information, especially when we talked about the Peruvian Amazon. So there's a lot of ecosystems here that haven't been explored. And nowadays, my main thought, and this is following what Sylvia said on Friday, more people have been to the moon than to the deep part of the oceans. And in a similar way, more people have been to the moon than I think more people have been studying the microorganisms in the Peruvian Amazon. And so I partnered with an amazing group of colleagues and scientists to explore the Boiling River, which is a really unique ecosystem. And if you have never heard about the Boiling River of Peru, I highly recommend that you go to TED Talks by Andres Russo, a dear friend and the director of the Boiling River Project, who made this ecosystem known to the world years ago. And it's a giant river that has no volcanic origins, and its traditional name is Xanaytin Pixca, which means boil with the heat of the sun. It goes really, really hot for about 4 miles. It's really wide, and it's been a mystery for all of us. Why is it boiling? Can anything live in there? Because most forms of life won't be able to resist temperatures really higher than 45 or 50 Celsius, because that's around where DNA starts to degrade. However, whenever we went to explore this area, we noticed that there was microscopic organisms just thriving in here. So here in this case, you can see different algae mats, which is when microbes form such large communities that all of a sudden now you can see them with your naked eyes. Meanwhile, any other forms of life, especially small mammals, were immediately dying when they were falling into the river. So there's many questions here that interest us, including how have these microorganisms evolved their own DNA to be able to thrive in these conditions. So that can teach us not only about how the river was formed, but also how did the evolution of life in the Amazon in this specific area may have occurred. And also by these microorganisms being able to flourish in such extreme conditions, not only have they evolved their DNA to do so, but they may be producing molecules that allow them to have this protective mechanism, which could be molecules that could be useful for us in the human world. And so nobody had looked deeply at this question. What are these extreme forms of microbes that we also know as extremophiles in the Boiling River? And so we decided to get a group together and do just that. So this was a project in collaboration with the University of Michigan, specifically the Sherman Laboratory and the Natural Product Drug Discovery Corps, as well as the Boiling River Project and the University Agraria in Lima, Peru, with local scientists. We traveled there a little bit before COVID hit around the world to collect samples throughout the river in the really hot spots, in the milder temperature spots, so that we could create basically a map of how does the microscopic life of the Boiling River looks like, and being able to infer hypotheses from there. What does that mean to the life around it, the plants, the animals, and the geology of the system as well. I cannot share many results yet because we're putting this together into a publication as we speak. But basically, one of the main questions we also wanted to answer is, how many microbes can we find in 1 cubic centimeter of Boiling River sediments? And so far, I can tell you with confidence that we're finding an immense diversity of unique microbes. Some of them don't even have a hit in any references available, which mean maybe new to describe science before. And so with this, we are creating the first large-scale biodiversity assessment of the Boiling River and one of the first microbial maps of the Amazon rainforest, if not the first to my knowledge right now. And so that was one research project. Another one that I'm really excited to get started more towards the end of the year, once we wrap up the Boiling River project, is looking at Amazonian stingless bees. I've been working with colleagues in the Amazon for many years, and one of them has a deep interest in the medicinal use of insects in the Amazon by traditional medicine, by the different communities that still live around. And so he does great, beautiful work in ethnobotany to be able to collect this information and being able to leave a record of it, as some of the communities still are disappearing and all of the knowledge that they carry with them are disappearing as well. So we want to make sure that this doesn't happen. And one of these was the use of the medicinal honey that some of the Amazonian stingless bees produce. And also the concept that some of these bees have the ability to produce poisonous honey. So it's a really interesting project that we were able to connect with more deeply just a few months ago. I was able to travel to the communities, being able to meet them, understand the process that they follow to be able to keep these bees. The local government has been giving them a lot of training and support so that this can also become a source of circular economy for them. A lot of the communities were hit hard by COVID, not only by what we all were hit by, but also because they couldn't receive a lot of the economical relief support that the government was providing because of the distance and the difficulty, even in signal or in internet. So selling the honey from these bees became a big source for them. And it continues to be so. And so more and more communities are getting encouraged to learn what bees to keep around, how to keep them better, how to sell the honey, etc. And another interesting concept with this is that we need to remember bees are such an important pollinators in our ecosystem. So they're helping bringing up the agricultural crops around these areas. Actually, research done by my colleague Cesar over in Peru shows that if you are keeping bees in the Amazon, your agricultural crops will increase by 44%. And this is really important, especially when we consider areas that have been hit quite hard by deforestation and contamination in the jungle. So you'll be hearing more about this project soon, but we're going to be looking at the chemical composition of the honey, the medicinal and the poisonous honey, and as well as looking at the microbes that live within the bees and see if these may have any impact in how the honey is being made or the molecules that are found within them. I've also been very involved in education. The more I progressed in science, I have just been fascinated about the idea of sharing not only what we're learning and researching about, but what others are doing as well. And so I partner with different educators, and today I want to tell you about one of the most extraordinary educators I've been able to work with, Sherry Barton, Nat Geo educator based in Idaho, and a hands-on scientific exploration experience that we developed in Yellowstone. So I partnered with Sherry to be able to share with her fourth grade classroom about the work I did in the Amazon and how you can use different expertise to study one ecosystem, as Andres has shown us, to be able to do in the Boiling River, but how can we use microbes to understand nature better, to understand how does the flora and the fauna of one ecosystem connect, how this concept of interconnectedness and macro to micro life. And so we had a semester-long engagement with a classroom where they got to ask me questions. I showed them how to use a microscope, how to collect samples from the wild to look for microbes, and how can this help us to be able to advocate for the conservation of endangered ecosystems better. And we finished this experience with a field trip in Yellowstone, where they were able to go around with me and being able to spot microbes in the wild, and what did that mean for some of the small plants that are able to grow at the hot temperatures of the Yellowstone boiling waters. What does that mean for the animals like the bison that are around them? We partner with local scientists as well to look at the microinvertebrates that are able to grow and live in the colder areas in Yellowstone, and being able to just really get the kids to feel as they can explore and they can be scientists. But we also incorporated a lot of art into this project, where they were able to not only paint what they were seeing, but also being able to compose a song about it with a local musician and being able to share their thoughts and how they were processing everything that they were learning through music. I am also very passionate about communication. And one of the things I miss the most during being quarantine was being able to talk with people and hearing their stories. Every time I was able to travel to the jungle, I was able to connect with so many people, hearing what they were researching about or their experiences. And that's something that really hit me, being away from that. And so I decided to reconnect with people that were either currently in the jungle or working still with it, or their travels were impacted because of COVID. And I decided this time to document it and sharing that through small clips in social media, both in Spanish and English, and just being able to represent a wide array of really great scientists, explorers, artists, or educators that their work deserves to be highlighted even more. I also participate in different international science communication campaigns, such as this one on the recycling of the most common plastics in partnership with Nat Geo and Pepsi, where I was able to teach the audience what the different kinds of plastics that are out there, how to best recycle them, what does recycling means in comparison to upcycling, for example. This is in Spanish, but also available with English subtitles. And with that, I'm just really excited to continue with my research right now as a postdoctorate research associate at University of Michigan, and then within a few months, moving into a more independent position. And my main goal is not only being able to continue with science that I find interesting, but that also elevates others, where we bring more of these experiences into more classrooms, getting more kids to be able to do this hands-on. I think that's something that I got to do unofficially as I was growing up with my grandma, because she would always just have me getting my hands dirty and being able to ask questions. And my mom and my dad were great at helping me push my mind in different directions. And I feel like that's something that we need more of, especially as we transition into more of a virtual world inevitably. And so with that, I'm just always happy to chat and hear people's stories. So don't hesitate in reaching out. And thank you very much, Joe, for the opportunity.
All right. Of course, Rosa, what a great presentation, and what an amazing collection of projects you are working on. And the Boiling River, what an amazing ecosystem.
Yeah, we're very excited to be able to share about that. Hopefully within the next few months, I think we'll be ready. We have a great team. It's not only me by any means. We have an amazing local scientist named Felipe, who's completing his doctorate and has been doing a lot of the bioinformatic works. We're not only taking a look at the ecosystem of the Boiling River, but we wanted to be able to compare it at a deeper chemical level, a genetic level, with other similar ecosystems, and how do they differ, or how are they similar at this micro level. So that's something that we're very excited to be sharing about soon too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're finding a diverse group of microbes, of extremophiles in this environment. What benefit is it to know more about this community for the ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah, so a clear example, and I think this is a benefit to global humanity in general, it's by studying one of the extreme forms of microbes living in Yellowstone a long time ago, that a scientist was able to just ask the question, can anything live in here? And by being able to do that initial exploratory work, this led for us to being able to access now PCR, which has become such a staple to be able to detect COVID early on, because there's an enzyme within one of those extremophiles in Yellowstone that is able to resist high temperatures because of the nature of where it was found. And so it facilitates and speeds up the work that we're able to do in lab to amplify DNA and being able to detect whatever we're looking for. In this specific case, for what I'm talking about, is COVID. But I think it just shows how quickly nature evolves. And also, I think the aspect I come from is that microbes have this ability to evolve in real time, like really quickly. And so we also have microbes now that have been found being able to degrade plastic or degrade and consume petroleum, for example. So I think because of this inherent ability that they have to evolve in very extreme conditions where we wouldn't be able to survive or evolve so quickly as them, then we're able to harness that without injuring the environment, but instead being able to harness that information so that we can protect the environment better.
Awesome, Rosa. Rosa, do you ever feel like you're in a race against time? I mean, there's so much we can learn from the small world, from the plant world, we don't pay enough attention to. And there are medicinal value to microbes, to plant life. So do you feel sometimes like you're in a little bit of a race against time to document these species and look for that green chemistry and the benefits that they can have?
Yes, absolutely. But I think the only way to fight against that is just to bring more people in with you. I think to remember that we cannot achieve any success in science alone, but rather collaboratively. And I think we need more locals doing work in their field. So I think we need not only more Peruvians doing work in Peru, but we need more Colombians doing work in the Colombian jungle, Brazilians, and etc. I think that facilitates the bridge into being able to not only access the location, but being able to better kind of think about where to collect or where to start, what areas do we need to preserve the most right now, so that we should be looking at the microorganisms and macro ones as well now before they get extinguished. So we get a certain information in the rest of the world here, but there's nothing like being in the field day by day. The local people that are there are the guardians of the location. And I think we need to be able to bring more of the science there and being able to create more international collaborations so that we can just progress at a faster speed than where we're losing everything.
And then you mentioned the local community and empowering others in the local community to be a part of these projects. Do you find that traditional knowledge is right on par with the science that you're bringing into the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really interesting, yes, to realize that there's so much knowledge that is so important and relevant to the nature where the communities are found that they already know that we haven't even begun to tap yet. And so I think that's why the dialogue and the trust and building that consistently is really important. So not only do we learn from them, but that they also learn about what we're doing. And there's not only respect, but there's also fairness in the whole process. In our specific work, we make sure that they understand not only what we are coming to do and what our intentions are, but what are the results of our science do and how can that help them. So one of my dream goals is that the work that we do can help conserve areas better so that they can get better rights to be able to protect the lands and being able to take microbes into another layer of why should we protect this area. And I think we're getting close to being able at a stage to do that, and that makes me really excited.
Awesome. Rosa, one of the last projects you talked about was education with science communication. And I think science communication is being recognized more and more as being such an important part of projects, because if scientists are only talking to their peers, using language that's not accessible to broader communities, then, the work they're doing isn't having the benefit that it could. So what has bringing more science communication, how has that benefited projects like the Boiling River or the Yellowstone Project?
Yeah, actually, I was reading this Twitter thread the other day where they were saying these last 2 years have become the most important for science journalists out there, in a way, of course, because when we consider the pandemics and the lack of information that goes around it, and this applies to all science projects out there. That's why I'm so passionate about this topic. I would say one of the biggest impacts of science communications that I've seen recently was learning that one of the institutes that I collaborate with in the northern Peruvian jungle, which is called the Institute of Investigations of the Peruvian Amazon, how they are losing funding because they don't have enough science communication strategies, that's something they're working on right now. It's one of the largest institutions in the Amazon in South America and who does incredible, thorough, rigorous scientific work. They have a lot of scientific publications going out every year. However, there was this lack of communication just because we don't have the training yet. There's a lot of universities that don't have science communication as a training strategy or module whenever we're training scientists. And I think that's something that we're missing. For Boiling River, I think it's just being able to bring a whole new layer of conversation when we talk about not only such an extreme environment, but when we talk about the Amazon rainforest, and then this concept that, hey, life goes beyond what we've been able to see. And that needs to be really present in us, because it makes us also realize we're losing way more than we're able to see right now. But there's also, I think, a lot of hope as well. And we just need to act quickly, as you say.
All right. Absolutely. You're so right about there not being enough education for science communication. If you look around in a lot of major universities, they're available some spots, these courses, and many other places they're not. And I think every science team, every field team should include a specialist in media who can kind of capture those moments and kind of share them more broadly with the general public.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing, for this last project of the Amazonian stingless bees, I was able to, through National Geographic, I was able to partner with an incredible photographer and artist based in Peru named Ana Sotelo, who was here to bring that aspect. So we had this idea. She has a lot of interest in science and traditional medicine, and I've been wanting to integrate more of this artistic approach to what we do, in addition to the communication, because I think they go pair by pair, hand by hand, sorry. And so she was able to come with me, and we were able to create this set of visuals to communicate what we're doing, but also the conversations and the dialogue that we maintain with the locals throughout this entire process. We haven't been able to share that yet, but I think the results are astonishing, and to like how much we are able to communicate by being able to bring an expert into these field trips. So I agree with you. Yeah,
absolutely. Amazing, Rosa. I want to share a couple links here. Here's a link to the website, to the boilingriver.org, if you want to dive a little bit deeper into that project. I also want to share your Twitter and Instagram handles. So if people want to follow along, learn more about yourself, learn more about the work that you are doing, I think those are some great places to get started. And then Rosa, I want to just thank you so much for joining us today. You're doing great work, bringing art into science, exploring a small world that's often ignored and forgotten. And then the education aspect of it is so important to empower people, not only in the local communities, but then to also kind of take it into a wider, a wider audience. So awesome, Rosa. Great work. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Joe. And thank you for organizing this. This is awesome. Thank you.
All right. Have a great rest of the weekend. All right. Great to spend a little bit of time with Rosa, and what an incredible ecosystem in Peru. Do check out that site. I'm going to pop it up one more time. The Boiling River is such an extreme ecosystem. It's such a unique area because, normally when you get a river or a body of water like that, there's volcanic activity in the area. So that's what makes this so unique. It really is a unique formation and a unique ecosystem, and the extremophiles found within that environment are just incredible, able to survive those incredible temperatures. So our next speaker, we've touched on this throughout the weekend, and we do another festival called the Global Biodiversity Festival, where we talk about biodiversity all around the world. We do that every May. It lasts for like 80 hours straight. Last year we had 160 speakers, 7 continents, 60 plus countries around the world. And a real theme of the Biodiversity Festival is Indigenous-led conservation. We're going to have a real focus on it throughout the weekend in May when we have the festival. And Indigenous peoples are really the stewards of our conservation. 80% of our biodiversity is under their stewardship right now, and these areas are under threat. So this is where this next conversation takes us. I was able to connect with Olivia McKendrick. She was a skilled negotiator and tenacious corporate lawyer at Linklaters for more than 25 years. She attended the Paris Climate Change Summit in 2015, and her life totally changed. She partnered with renowned National Geographic photographer Chris Rainier and joined the Cultural Sanctuaries Foundation as director and COO. They're working to sustain biodiversity by nurturing Indigenous cultural communities, as they are the best guardians of Earth's biodiversity. So Olivia is currently in Dubai and was unable to join us live, but we connected for a conversation literally the morning that she was leaving. It was a great conversation, so let's jump into it here.
Thank you, Joe, for having me as part of this weekend's festival. What a real treat it is to be talking alongside so many extraordinary women. My name is Olivia McKendrick, and I want to take the opportunity today to tell you a little bit about what I do and why. Looking at the lineup of the other speakers at the festival this weekend, I see that their passions for science, for nature, for ocean, for space, date back often to their university days, even childhood. My story is a bit different, as I was a corporate lawyer for 24 years, and it was only after a fork in the road some 8 years ago that I changed direction. And my partner and I, Chris Rainier and I, founded and now run a non-profit called the Cultural Sanctuaries Foundation, which focuses on protecting culture to protect biodiversity. And I'll tell you more about that shortly. But for now, though, I want to start by talking about starfish. And in my old law firm days, each year we had a big global partner offsite and gathered to discuss the state of the firm and strategy and finances and all that sort of stuff. And at one of these conferences, sitting in a huge room of lawyers, our then managing partner told us a story about starfish. And he described an old man walking towards the shore and seeing with amazement thousands and thousands of starfish washed up on the shore, on the sand. And little girls stood at the edge of the surf and helped a starfish back into the water. And the old man walked up to her and very kindly said that her mission was impossible, that there was no way she'd ever save all the dying starfish. And she looked up at him and she gingerly slid another starfish back into the waves and said firmly, "No, you're wrong. I can make a difference. I can save this one. To this one, I can make a difference." You know, I can't for the life of me remember why that story was relevant to a bunch of lawyers, but I do remember it coming back to me incredibly vividly a few years ago. Chris and I were in a small village in Bhutan called Ruka, and music was playing and we were watching some of the community dance in celebration, music all around. And to give you some context, Ruka is this beautiful little village in a stunning valley high in the Himalayas in Bhutan. It sits in the middle of 5 mountains, so it's almost like a sort of center of a beautiful green flower. And the people that live there are the Olep people, who are the oldest indigenous community in Bhutan. And with the Royal Family of Bhutan and a group called, an NGO called the Tariana Foundation, we'd been working for some years in Ruka because its language was endangered and its culture was endangered. And the local youth, the kids, were increasingly going off to find work in the capital of Bhutan, Thimphu, and other cities, really to look for jobs. And most importantly, there were only 3 speakers of the Ole language, which is the language spoken by the Olep. There are only 3 speakers left. 2 were in their early 80s, and one, Kenga, was at the time we first went there was 64. And the young kids in the village just weren't interested in what was sort of considered grandma's language. And so our project was focused on helping protect that local culture and local language. And the first thing we did, the main thing we did, was we commissioned the building of a community cultural center. And that center now doubles as it's a living museum. It's a homestay for tourists when they come to village, COVID permitting, to bring welcome income. It's a schoolroom, and the local kids are now all being taught Ole. And along with the center, the other thing we did with a group of local and international scientists was to create a survey of all of the local culture, language, knowledge, biodiversity, medicinal plants, et cetera, for the community, to enshrine their culture in a sort of snapshot of their culture. And with a group of local linguists and the last 3 remaining speakers of Ole, we created the first ever dictionary of the language. It had never been written down before. So here we were, listening to this music, watching a dance, celebrating the official opening of our community centre. And the Bhutanese Queen Mother came and blessed the official ceremony. And the community elders all gave speeches, and the kids were dancing and music was playing. And I felt such incredible pride, and I got rather tearful. And just thinking about the fact that the Olep culture would now be protected into the future, and tourists would be able to come and learn about this remarkable place and the remarkable community that live there. And the kids in Ruka wouldn't have to go to the cities to find work. They could stay in the valley if they wanted to. And finally, that the Ole language might now have a chance. And it was at that point, thinking about that I just thought about the starfish story. It just came back to me in a flash. And I thought, well, there are cultures eroding all around the world, and there are languages dying at the rate of 24 a year. 24 oral languages die a year, which is just extraordinary. And I just thought, but we had made a difference. We had made a difference to that culture and to that language. So rolling back the clock a bit, just to explain perhaps more of the context of this all, when I went to the Paris Climate COP in 2015, I was still a partner at my law firm. I knew little of conservation, I knew less about Indigenous communities, and I knew absolutely nothing about the connection between the two. Chris, on the other hand, had spent his life as a photographer and National Geographic explorer, really learning about and supporting Indigenous cultures all over the world and working with endangered languages all over the world. So he understood that Indigenous sort of depth of Indigenous knowledge, and understood that their message that nature was not for consumption and that we had to nurture it and love it and look after it rather than just consume, and in a way that we all need to re-indigenize. So at this Paris Climate Conference, we both had a sort of light bulb moment over some escargot and a glass, maybe a bottle of red wine, and just really suddenly just sort of realized that Indigenous guardianship, Indigenous culture, Indigenous knowledge had to be at the forefront of the climate change debate and the climate change fight. And so not long after that, we set up our charity foundation, the Cultural Sanctuaries Foundation, that we now run. And not long after that, I left my legal career to work full-time for the foundation. So what do? We work at the crossroads of culture and conservation. We work where both culture and biodiversity are endangered. And of course, the fact is that the two almost always overlap. 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is on land lived on by Indigenous people. And I'm not sure everybody knows that. I certainly didn't know that. And science now proves that that Indigenous, where land is lived on by Indigenous people, it will thrive and it's got a better chance than even national park status. So Indigenous peoples are proved by science to be the best guardians of biodiversity. But Indigenous peoples cannot be its guardians if they're forced by economic duress or climate change or wilderness degradation to move from their land, or if they've got no choice but to join the illegal or legal miners or loggers for want of any other income or other jobs. And they can't be its guardians if their kids leave, if their languages die out and the connection with the land is broken. So if we are to protect land and ocean, we have to protect culture and language. And if we're to stop deforestation, we have to help support other jobs for local communities. And if we're going to protect more land and ocean, we need to let the Indigenous communities lead the way and let them support their involvement and not let them be displaced or disadvantaged any further. It's all interconnected, it's all one ecosystem and one economic system too. And sometimes people ask us, what is the solution that Indigenous people bring? What is this magic answer to climate change? And of course, there are myriad examples of Indigenous solutions to biodiversity sustainability. In Guatemala, climate signs are read by Indigenous elders. Exposed roots of corn foretell hurricanes and storms in the upcoming winter. And the size of particular birds' nests indicate the need to delay or start the planting of crops. In Central Europe, traditional herders know exactly how to manage their pastures, the right kind and level of grazing to keep the weeds and bushes in check and keep the grasslands in balance. In Malaysia, Indigenous communities operate a system called Tegal, which sustainably manage their rivers, and committees of elected elders decide on no-take areas and ban destructive fishing practices so that fish numbers increase, endemic species return, and the river system stays healthy. And perhaps a very apt example in Australia, the Aboriginal millennium-long practice of intentional burning staves off the risk of these mega forest fires that we've been seeing all around the world, California, Europe, and Australia. And after generations of being banned from practicing their traditional fire knowledge, this right way burning is now being recognized by the authorities. It is being reintroduced as the right approach to combat the forest fire issues. And the list goes on and on and on. But the point is that none of these specific examples represent a sort of silver bullet. There is no sort of indigenous silver bullet to the climate change debate or the biodiversity fight. The key thing is the understanding of nature, the connection with nature, the respect for nature, the fact that the land goes together. And as Al Gore always says, you know, we can't just keep treating our air as an open sewer. And as Sylvia Earle, who I think is also speaking at this weekend's festival, says we can't just keep taking from our ocean as if we've got a kind of ATM that only has a withdrawal function. And so we've got to follow this lead, this indigenous lead, and allow the indigenous peoples to be the guardians that they have been for so many thousands of years. And I think it's funny, people sometimes wonder what a white former corporate lawyer from Cambridge, England, is doing, talking about indigenous communities and working with indigenous communities, promoting indigenous communities. And I don't see any disconnect in that at all. My father is a huge proponent, passionate about women's rights. And you don't have to be a woman to stand up for women's rights. You don't need to be black to march for Black Lives Matter. And you don't need to be indigenous to understand the critical importance of indigenous communities, both in terms of culture and in terms of biodiversity. So and it's up to all of us to fix this wherever we're from and whatever we can do. And the other thing that sort of has surprised me in relation to all of this in some ways is how much easier the transition from being a corporate lawyer in London and New York to philanthropy and conservation has been much, much easier than I would ever have expected. I mean, if you told me 10 years ago that I would be leaving my law firm, I would not have believed you. I absolutely lived and breathed that job. People used to say I'd be carried out in a box. But when the time came, actually, the move was remarkably easy. And if anything, I sort of felt guilty about not being more guilty. And I jumped sort of headfirst into this new direction and this new passion. And the two things have been remarkably connected in some ways, because in some ways my legal career really set me up for this new life, this new direction. And many of the skill sets that I learned in the time, my decades as a lawyer, seem just as relevant now, not just because in running the foundation there's lots of sort of legal stuff, which there is, but because, you know, everything that you do, well, everything we do now in running the Cultural Sanctuaries Foundation and in our projects is preparing budgets, forming partnerships, negotiating, building relationships, building strategies, fundraising, making presentations, doing pitches. Everything was really born of what I learned in my legal career. So it's funny in a way how sometimes life's twists and turns take you in new directions, but it's really shown me that it's fine to take a new direction and it's fine to do different things. And I love my legal career, but I now love even more running the foundation and doing our projects. And I guess the main lesson for me has been that doing one thing for a long time doesn't mean that you can't do another. So 5 years in at Cultural Sanctuaries, alongside our projects in Bhutan, we've got projects in Mongolia, Mexico, Ecuador, Brazil, and Kenya, to name but a few. We've got other projects in the works. We've got a lot to do, and we're in a race against time. But the good news is, the really good news, that at the recent Glasgow Climate Conference, just in November, unlike in Paris, no one questioned the connection between Indigenous culture and conservation. I think that connection seems now to be really understood and really accepted. and the role of Indigenous peoples, the role of Indigenous guardianship is really recognised now, which is fantastic. So we feel our work is even more important. And as the world moves to protect 30 by 30, which is this ambition to protect 30% of oceans and 30% of land by 2030, and as we move to end deforestation, we've got to protect culture and language. Underpinning all of this, we've got to protect culture and language as we go. We have to protect the protectors. So if anything, at the foundation, our ambitions are growing. And if when we started, we sort of envisaged 10 projects and then perhaps 20 projects, we now are thinking of more, of going further. And really we're looking for collaboration, and we always work in partnerships with both local NGOs, obviously, and the communities that we work with, but to form other collaborations, perhaps with people listening to the festival today, perhaps to people involved in the festival, speaking at the festival, so that we can do further, go further and do more. And I sometimes think about that old story about, you know, how easy it is to snap one pencil, but if you put a bunch of pencils together as hard as you cannot break them. And so if we can work together and join forces, we could do even more. What if we could by joining together, protect all endangered cultures and all languages, and reforest the planet, and clean our oceans, and clean our air, and help wildlife to thrive. And in a way, it takes me back to the starfish story. You know, what if we could save all the starfish? Thank you very much. Thanks, Joe.
All right, Olivia, thank you so much for that great background information, that great presentation today. It's incredibly important work, and makes it all the more exciting to hear that at COP earlier in the year that relationship, that connection was being more acknowledged. There wasn't doubt behind it, or you know, you didn't have to push as hard to convince people. We are understanding that now.
Yeah, I mean, an extraordinary sea change in 5 years. I mean, even to the extent that people said to us, "Don't worry, you don't need to convince us anymore. We know you don't need to shout this from the rooftops." The question is not now what, it's how, or it's not why, it's how. It's how are we going to make sure we protect Indigenous guardians? How are we going to stop deforestation? They're the key thing, and how are we going to pay for it?
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your transition from being a lawyer into this new career, and I think you know, the same story can be seen in a lot of the speakers, is starting off maybe in one field, but then following their passion and finding it led them somewhere else, and making a big change. So with any change, I know there's, you know, there might be some feelings of doubt that creep in, or a little bit nervous to leave a stable career. So I'm curious what advice you would give to someone who, you know, maybe wants to make that change, has a passion, they want to follow it, they want to make some change. What advice would you give them?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I think it was my father who was much more worried about my leaving my stable career than I ever was. I mean, as I said to him, you know, I said, you know, it's not irreversible. If this is a mistake, it's not the end of the world, but I just want to try this. Let's see if we can do this. And actually, as I said, I lived and breathed my law firm job. I was working 20 hours a day for years. I'm really passionate about the job, actually quite blinkered about the job. I didn't sort of look out and up very much to other things. But increasingly, and I never really left my legal job as much as I moved to the Cultural Sanctuaries work. It felt like a positive move towards something rather than a negative move away from something, and certainly not for any negative reasons at all. So the key thing I would say is, you know, just give it a go. And I just don't think it's right that we only do one thing, and one job can lead on to another, and you can use all the same skills and all of the same. I mean, the one good thing, of course, about being a lawyer for 24 years is I had some financial security. I had my own flat, so I could sort of make that leap of faith, perhaps in a way that might be harder for other people. So that financial security, I think, did help. But I think the key thing I would say, that just because you've always done something does not mean that that's what you've always got to do. You can take a new direction and see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think many would echo that when you can turn your passion into a career, when you're loving everything you're doing day in and day out, it's the way to go. There's no other way to do it.
and then it doesn't feel like work. I mean, you know, it's because it's just life. And actually, in a way, the work-life balance sort of blurs if you're passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter that there doesn't need to be a break. You don't need to stop at 5 o'clock. And I think the other key thing is that I've always loved traveling, and I've always loved photography, and I've always loved meeting people and understanding their lives and their dreams and all of that sort of stuff. Maybe sounds a bit cliched, but and I really feel, as much as I absolutely loved my legal career, I would genuinely say that I have learnt more and sort of questioned more, thought more in the last 8 years than I did in the previous 25. So the new direction has, I just feel it's like a journey, for want of a better word. It's just the next chapter, but it's a chapter in which I'm actually learning more now than I did before.
Yeah. And so, you know, you mentioned travel. You have projects in different places around the world. So I'm wondering, when you're working with the indigenous peoples and they look at our lifestyle and the way we're living in the developed world, and like you said, that ATM machine with only a withdrawal, I wonder how they feel. Is it anger? Is it pity for us that we're so disconnected from the natural world? What kind of feeling do you get?
I think that's a really tough question. I'm always sort of nervous of speaking on behalf of other people in terms of their views. I think it really depends on the community, and I think to some extent they should be angry, and they should care, that they should really mind about what sort of Western or modern society has done, because they've least caused this problem, but yet they're the ones on the front lines of having to cope with it, literally on the front lines, and will be. Well, so they should be angry, but I've never felt that anger at all. I mean, I really haven't, and I don't know whether it's because they don't know the extent of which the Western societies have caused this problem and the huge disconnect between the emissions levels, or that they just don't blame us as individuals for what is a sort of societal problem. I've never seen any anger or anything like that. Other than, I think they should pity us, though. I mean, in a way, because we have lost that disconnection. We have lost that connection to the land. And actually, I've really enjoyed, for me, getting that back in a way. You know, when I was sitting in my office in London or New York over the years, or I was starting up my Mini Cooper, I didn't think for a second where the fuel was coming from. Or when I turned on the tap in my flat, I didn't think for a second about where that water came from, or, you know, remember to turn it off when I was brushing my teeth, etc. So I think we have lost that disconnect, and I've enjoyed getting back into nature and seeing how healing it is. So again, I've not seen pity or anger, but I suspect it should be there.
No, absolutely. And, you know, what you mentioned is them being on the front lines of the change that we are seeing. And, you know, you think of a country like Kiribati, where it's disappearing beneath the waves, and you'd be hard pressed to find a country that had less of an impact on the climate change that we're experiencing right now.
Well, we heard, I think it was the president of Kiribati talk in Paris, and he was talking about, he was imploring the world's leaders to do something, to do more, to fix this problem. And as you say, you know, absolutely, they contributed nothing to the issue. But for him, he said, you know, to be realistic, his fight was not now about mitigation. His challenge was what he called migration with dignity, where the people of Kiribati and those other islands that are sinking under the waves, where they're going to go, when the water levels continue to rise. And what someone in the audience said to him was, sort of, what are you going to do to keep your culture alive after the people have all had to move somewhere else? And he said, well, there won't be a government, there won't be a country. It will have disappeared. It'll be up to the people to keep their own culture wherever they've moved to. But it's so incredibly moving that, you know, to realize the impacts that the world has created, or we've created.
All right, let's come back from that screen share there. Incredible work being done by the Cultural Sanctuaries Foundation. An absolute pleasure to have Olivia joining us and sharing her story. I'm going to share a couple links with you before we introduce our next live event. So just bear with me for a moment. The first one, I want to make sure that you spend a little time on the Instagram site for Cultural Sanctuaries. So if you want to follow some of their work, I suggest that you do it there. And of course, the website's a great spot to find some of the projects they're working on, the mission statement, and some more information about just why it's so important that we're protecting the protectors. If we want to protect biodiversity, if we want to protect our wild places and our planet, we need to protect those who are doing it already. If we can help protect their culture, their language, well, that is what's going to help us protect our planet. Protecting the protectors, 80% of our biodiversity is under the stewardship of Indigenous peoples. And during the Global Biodiversity Festival, we will have a big showcase of Indigenous-led conservation around the world. All right, let us take a little virtual field trip now. Let's head to Costa Rica. I'm so excited for this event. Through Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we get to spend a lot of time over the course of a school year visiting the Toucan Rescue Ranch in Costa Rica. They do absolutely incredible work there, protecting native Costa Rican wildlife. But this is a treat for me. This is the first time I'm going to get to host Leslie. So Leslie Howell is the founder and director of the Toucan Rescue Ranch. So she spent time working in the US, but then returned to the jungles in Peru to study wild macaws. And this led her back to Costa Rica and her dream of establishing a bird refugee center. If we fast forward to today, the Toucan Rescue Ranch provides sanctuary for native wildlife while giving treatment, rehabilitation, and when possible, release of those animals to their natural environment. So toucans, sloths, owls, weasels, porcupines, cats, kinkajous, parrots, and more have all found refuge at the Toucan Rescue Ranch. I'm going to bring Leslie in live with us right now. Hi, Leslie. How are you?
Hi. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good, good. Leslie, it's such a pleasure to have you joining us. So great to see you. And I see that you're not alone today.
I'm not alone. I have a little new patient that came into the Toucan Rescue Ranch a couple days ago. Her name is Martha, and she's a little blondie two-toed sloth baby.
Absolutely beautiful. How what was the situation around her coming to the rescue ranch?
So she was found without a mom, just on the ground, and they're not sure what happened to the mom. And so people picked her up and took her to another rescue center, and they specialize in other different types of animals. And so they called us, and we actually went over there and were able to pick her up the other day. And so it's really nice when we get to work with other rescue centers together, all for the benefit, of the animals of Costa Rica. She's about a month old. Typically, the mothers that, the orphan babies that come in are because of mothers getting electrocuted with severe burns, even, dying, or because they're run over by a car, or just attacked by dogs or something like that. So it's usually something to do with human encroachment.
All right. Well, Leslie, I think it would be absolutely amazing if we could get to know you a little bit better. If you can tell us a little bit of your story and what led you to founding the Toucan Rescue Ranch.
All right, so I'm going to do that at the same time that I'm giving her a little bit of food because she's smacking her lips at me. And this has to be done very delicately, so I'm just going to be paying attention to her and talking. But my family moved us all here to Costa Rica when I was 7 years old. And my father was one of the first developers all the way out on the Pacific coast in a little town called Nosara, which is now very well known for surfing and meditation paradise of Costa Rica. But anyway, at that time when I was there, there was, hardly anything around except for a small village and a lot of howler monkeys and all kinds of wildlife. And so I grew up with like all of my vacation time there at the beach. And then on my dad's project and then in town for school. And since they were putting in, roads and wells and all of that kind of stuff, they did, people would find wildlife all the time and they would bring it to us because they knew that we, loved it and we would take care of it. And so we were raising baby monkeys as kids and lots of baby birds, baby macaws and things like that. And then just releasing them back into the wild there in Nosara, in Costa Rica. And so I grew up with a lot of the different wild animals of Costa Rica. And when I was 15, my dad was done with the project and he decided to move everybody to England, and that was a huge a huge change, as you can imagine. So I went to high school in London, and then I went back to the States for college, and I majored in occupational therapy, and I worked as a therapist in hospitals in Reno, Nevada for many, many years. And then I got to a big birthday and said, oh, I want to go back to Costa Rica to visit. And when I came back to visit, the first night I was wandering down this little road, to go into town to get something to eat. And I was passing by, these little like village homes, and all I kept thinking was, oh, I feel like I'm home. I want to move back. I got to get a bird. It was like all this kind of stuff just really overwhelmed me. And so after that trip, like you said in your introduction, I decided to focus more on birds, and I took a trip to Peru to study macaws in the wild in Peru, in Tambopata, Peru. And after the third time that I was there, the head of that program said, Leslie, there's an elderly couple in Costa Rica that's working with the macaws, and they're doing a great job, and they need help. And I was just like, me, done. So it was pretty traumatic, but I went back to the States, quit my job, sold my house, started getting the permits for all of the rescue birds that I had accumulated by then in the States. And I ended up moving here a year later with 10 birds and 3 dogs to go work for the Macaw Project. So after I was at the Macaw Project for like a year and a half, and I became part of their board of directors, I was slowly realizing that the only animals that were being rescued in Costa Rica at that time, which was in 2003 and 4, were macaws. There were 3 different groups, all focusing on macaws, and they all had really good programs. And the macaws were being released into the wild with soft releases. Those macaws, some of them were already finding nests or using artificial nests that were in the wild and having babies. And so I thought, well, they really don't need me because they've got it made. The macaws just have it made. And so I thought, well, I was seeing a lot of other birds coming into the rescue center that were basically not given the amount of attention as the macaws were. And so I thought, well, these are the birds that actually need my help. And on the top of the list were the toucans. And so that's how we decided to open the Toucan Rescue Ranch. I talked to the wildlife people. I was fortunate at that time because I spoke Spanish still to be in charge of all of their paperwork with the wildlife department. So I knew everybody in the wildlife department at that time. And I talked to them and I said, hey, is anybody in Costa Rica working with toucans? And they're like, oh, Leslie, nobody cares about toucans. I can say, unfortunately, it hasn't changed that much in all these years. But I said, well, I do. And that's how we opened the Toucan Rescue Ranch, to focus on like the non-macaws and the birds that actually needed help, which were toucans and all of the pet parrots in Costa Rica that were getting confiscated because of the new laws that changed that said nobody's allowed to have a wild animal as a pet anymore. And owls, there were no raptor centers at all in Costa Rica. And, when you think of Costa Rica, you don't really think about owls because you think of North America, but Costa Rica actually has 16 different kinds of owls. And so we do have a large raptor population, and not just owls, all the falcons and hawks and everything else. So so that's what we focus on. bird-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it started with birds. I know it started with the toucans, but there was a day when a very different kind of creature was brought to your door. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where it's
Exactly. So we had, at that point, we had bought a property an hour from here as our release site, like to release birds. And it was it's in Sarapiquí. It's one of the greatest birding areas of Costa Rica. And it's full of toucans and parrots and macaws and everything. And so we thought, oh, this property is perfect. But it also happened to be full of two-toed sloths and three-toed sloths. And so we were taking trips over there and then off to the Caribbean coast to explore a little bit. And we fell totally in love with the sloths that we were, finding up in the trees. And so we talked to the wildlife department and we said, hey, we might be interested in sloths as well, but only in like an adult sloth that I could rehab. I'm an occupational therapist by training. So it was like, I could do the rehab part. So I was like, okay, adult sloth that I can rehab and then take it to our release site and let it go. And they were very excited that I was interested in sloths because the only people working with sloths were on the Caribbean coast. And from the Central Valley, that's like a 6-hour drive. And sometimes they close the highway because it goes straight through the rainforest and there's mudslides and it can be closed for days at a time. So if a sloth needed to get to the rescue center on the Caribbean, they really couldn't get there. And so about a month later, they called me and they said, sloth coming in from the highway. And so I get this, huge kennel thinking I'm going to get an adult sloth hit by a car. And they bring in a little ball of fluff, a little bit bigger than this one. And in this cardboard box. And I look in and there's these two little, beautiful brown eyes looking up at me. And the guy's arm is all scratched up and he goes, yep, that was her. And I was like, wow. And then the only thing that everybody would tell me is, don't get attached because she's going to die. And I'd be like, well, not on my ship. But it's very complicated. And so as you can see with this apparatus that we have here, we have a miracle nipple, we have the 1 ml syringe, so that we're doing very, very slow feedings with the sloths. And that was the problem with the sloth babies, is that they tend to aspirate and it goes down the wrong way and then they can develop pneumonia. And so that's one of the things that we had to be really careful of. Because I had worked with baby birds that do the same thing, I was already a bit of ahead of the game. And so with luck, we were able to work with the sloths and have successes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now we specialize in sloths, toucans and owls. Although we have a bunch of other animals, we're carrying between the two sites, because we have a clinic at the other side and volunteers now at the release site as well. We're caring for around 300 to 350 animals, like anytime during the year. And we have a wonderful program that we did together with a group called the Sloth Institute for releasing our sloths and tracking them with radio collars. And so that was one of the big hurdles that we had to get through too, is, okay, we don't just want to accumulate, with all these sloths that people were saying at the time that they couldn't be released, but actually figure out a way to release them, to train them to release, and to be successful once they're released. And so I can tell you a little bit more about that if you're interested, or anything else.
I think it would be great if you told us a little bit about the program. I think one thing students love when they connect with the ranch is hearing about how the sloths go through different grade levels, right up to university. So yeah, can you please tell us a little bit about that program? How, a young sloth like our friend there would make their way through the program.
Right. So she's in nursery right now. And then, so the nursery school is basically on my porch and in my house, because we have to care for them 24 hours a day. And then, Andrea's showing you. And then take it. Can you actually move a little bit?
Yeah.
And take it. Okay. Take him over to see Serena, because she's like learning how to eat. So Serena is one of our older still babies. And as you can see, she's eating leaves right now. And one of the things that's really important that we do is that we hang the food for them so that when they wake up, like in their buckets and blankets, they have to think about, oh, I have to actually move and find food. And that's one of the really critical learning points that we want these sloths to gain, an experience that they have to gain. So once they've been here for,
until they're like,
I want to say at least probably a year, practically 8 months, 9 months to a year, depending on their weights. Then we transfer them over to, well, this is like first grade too, because she would be like a first grader. So we would transfer them over there to like the middle school. And in middle school, then they're able to, that's so funny, they're able to stay up all night. But they have people with them all night on large structures in a little guest house that we have, so that the sloths are learning to become more nocturnal. And again, we're still feeding them and supplementing with milk, but they're switching diets to be a more natural diet of all different kinds of leaves. And in the case of the two-toed sloth, it would be leaves, different fruits, different vegetables, seed pods, and then a little bit of protein that they need from in the wild. They would have protein from maybe like a bird's egg or like eating bugs and bark or something like that. And then the high school is, once we bring them out, we have some trees here in the front of the yard that are their favorite food for foraging. And so we have almond trees, and we have a ficus tree. The ficus is the favorite of the three-toed sloth, and the almonds are the favorite of the two-toed sloth. And then they can spend all day here in the trees foraging, and then they'll come in at night just for protection. And once they are at like 1.5 to 2 years old and weigh like 1.5 kilos to 2 kilos, then we send them out to the release site. And then they go through the whole process at the university there, where it's different stages again. And the last stage is they're in a really, really large enclosure, probably like a 2-story house, with doors that are like on pulleys and slide back and forth into the forest. And so then we'll set up branches and ropes that go in and out of the cage so that they can eventually go out into the forest. At that point, we put a radio collar on them and track them. And we also put a microchip with them. And so then we can track them and see how they're doing. And so far, we've now done the program for several years now. We have sloths that have been out in the wild and have come back to visit. And they've even come back to visit with babies in tow. And so we know it's working really, really well. And the one that did come back with the baby is one of our handicapped sloths that was missing an arm from being electrocuted. And she just went out there and did so great. And so we know that even if they're handicapped and missing an arm or a leg, they can still climb and they can still survive in the wild.
All right, Leslie, that's amazing. It is so great to hear stories like that where you're able to successfully reintroduce the animals back to the wild, and they're so successful. They're having young, and even like you just said, even in a situation where sometimes people might hesitate to re-release the sloth because of the injury like you spoke of, they're still able to thrive back into the wild. I think it really speaks to the level of care in the program, and the lengths you go to keep the sloths as far away from people and human contact as possible, which obviously is hard when they're really young, but then you kind of gradually bring them through those levels and rewild.
Right. It's a little bit of tough love, but we do the same thing the moms in the wild do, which is, start leaving them at that age, and then they don't have as much contact with me, and I just kind of go over and peek in the guest house, or peek up, walk by the tree and see how they're doing or something like that. But it's all for their benefit in the long run. We don't want them coming back and looking for us. We want them being successful sloths, reproducing in the wild and living the life that they're supposed to have.
Absolutely, no question. and I hear some other friends in the background, the birds.
When we first started, we were waiting to start. It was so noisy. We were just kind of like, oh, I wonder if we can do this. But we have a lot of macaws, and we have Amazon parrot, and the one that's screaming right now is a crazy cockatoo, not native to Costa Rica, but she hears my voice and just kind of goes off. And then I just wanted to say that the same program basically that we've done with the sloths, we do with parrots, and we've also done it with owls, and we've also done it with toucans. And so it's the sloths are kind of like the ones that take the most time and are just so much more involved because of the injuries. But with the rehab of the parrots and with the owls and the toucans, we've done the same different steps. It just doesn't take as long.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's got to feel good every single time with a reintroduction of the animal, and it's back out to that native habitat. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about where the Toucan Rescue Ranch gets its support from. How do you get the support to be able to do what you're doing?
So we don't receive any funding from the government. No rescue center does in Costa Rica, which makes it very difficult. And we're open for educational talks. And so before the pandemic, we were having educational talks like tours of our facility every day, several tours a day. And the tours were 70% of our income to be able to support the programs that we're doing. And then when the pandemic came and we basically, shut down as a whole country, that was very, very difficult for us. And fortunately, the virtual tours and the virtual talks and everything that we started doing with Learning by the Seat of Your Pants and all the other different groups, those are the ones that have really saved us during the pandemic. And then at the same time, our marketing department is really creative, and you can adopt one of the animals, or you can, figuratively adopt them to help support the medical program and to support them. And we do campaigns all year long based on different needs that we have, like if we have to build a new enclosure for an animal, or if we need a new piece of medical equipment or something like that. We have a full veterinary staff here, and we have a clinic that's very, very small, but very well equipped and very well used. Sometimes it's like double decker kennels in the clinic. We have so many animals in the clinic, so we do need to expand there. But it's been with a lot of private donations and a few grants that we've applied for, but mostly private donations that keep us going, and the tours. And now we're open again, and so we are getting tourism back to Costa Rica, and that's helping a lot as well. And we also, for those of you that would like to see the nursery on a daily basis, we have teamed up with Explore.org, and we have one of their cameras on our porch, basically 12 hours every day, watching the baby sloths and keeping track of them. And that's kind of fun to have the live cam on the porch, and people, learning about the babies and meeting the babies and things like that.
Oh, that's so cool. I had no idea that you started doing this. It's such a great way for people to kind of visit virtually when they're not maybe joining a talk or something, to see what's going on in the nursery. That's awesome.
Right. We're going to have a toucan camera real soon. We're doing the wiring to get that in place, so that'll be fun.
Awesome. Well, we got to meet last night. We got to meet Anna Maria, and who works as the veterinarian supervisor. And she's doing incredible work. We always love hosting her during the various festivals. So, yeah, I mean, lots of work done by that team, and it's amazing the recoveries that they're able to facilitate.
It is amazing. I mean, it's kind of, I can tell you the story of using tilapia skin. Tilapia skin is now famous for being used with burns, but it started by me just reading about the California wildfires a couple of years ago. And I was looking online and reading about it, and they were saying that they were using tilapia skin on the bear feet to heal the burns. And I was like, wow, Costa Rica has a lot of tilapia. We need to figure this one out. And then sure enough, one of the doctors that we worked with that was giving us Stelcems, no, did I say that right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, collagen and stem cells for regenerating burnt tissue and everything. She says, oh, we're now working with tilapia skin and we can, prepare it and everything for you. And so it was so wonderful to have that option. And so we're using a lot of really, innovative things here, and it's working, and it's bringing the healing process, faster for the animals, and they can get out of the clinic sooner, which means getting back to the wild sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned your marketing team and the great ideas they come up with. Sloth Ironman Games. Can you tell us a little bit about the Sloth Ironman Games?
Sloth Ironman Games are, it's kind of like Olympics, but it's, we focus every year on different sloths, our juvenile sloths that are in the program at that time. And part of the program for all of the animals here at the Toucan Rescue Ranch is that we have a really large enrichment program. And so, every week the volunteers are making, beautiful, like, Christmas tree ornaments of fruits and nuts and everything for, like, the parrots, or puzzles for the monkeys to figure out how to get, peanuts or something, or
cardboard boxes for
cardboard boxes filled with hay and smelly meat for the cats or something like that. But anyway, part of the Sloth Ironman Games is basically doing the basic things that we do with them for enrichment, but making it into like a game and a timed game. And so they have
the poop off challenge.
Yeah, the poop off challenge, which is basically when we take all the babies to go outside to poop. Sloths only poop like once a week, so it's a big deal around here when we get a weight and an actual weight, because if we weigh them when they haven't peed and pooped, then the weight's off, because they can lose, isn't it like a third of their body weight? A third of their body weight with the pee and poo. So we'll have the poop off challenge, the hibiscus eating challenge, because they love to eat flowers, and we'll have
the 1 meter dash.
The 1 meter dash, which is basically them, climbing skills, and then the strong sloth challenge, which is like a pull up. And I want to show you little Reggae. Can you or bring the bucket up?
Yeah,
we're going to show you Reggae. He's our three-toed sloth, and one of our sloth babies. And all morning long, he was doing like the strong sloth challenge, pulling himself up on a new structure just with his arms. And we've been seeing him pull and pull and pull with his arms, but he hasn't been using his legs that much. And today he used his legs.
If you go on explore.org, you will definitely get to see that.
Everybody, we've all been taking pictures of him all day long using his legs. It was a big
milestone.
A big milestone, and then he quickly just dropped in the basket and fell sound asleep. So he's been sleeping for like the past 4 hours, very soundly. So anyway, look that way. Look that way. So that they can see you. So even though they're sloths, two-toed sloths and three-toed sloths are like totally different animals, but same family.
Amazing, absolutely beautiful. I'm not surprised that he's tired. First time is a pretty big deal, so I'm not surprised that he's tired out after that today.
Yes, he was really tired. But it's almost feeding time again, so it was okay to wake him up, because I got to feed him pretty soon.
Perfect. Well, Leslie, I want to first of all, I want to share some links. Here's the link if people want to follow along on Twitter and Instagram to the Toucan Rescue Ranch, where they can get updates and hear about different promotions and things that are going on. And then I want to share the link to the website, toucanrescueranch.org. A great spot to visit to find out more about the work, and of course to support the work, because like you said, this work is supported by donors, by people coming to visit, and another option too is volunteering, right? If you're in the area for 18 to 20 days.
20.
So we have volunteers and we have internships. The internships are either 3 months or 6 months, and then the volunteers usually stay for like a month or 2.
All right. Amazing. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for the incredible work you're doing in Costa Rica. It was so great to see. I'm going to make you full screen again because we want to look at our three-toed friend again one more time. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thanks for sharing it with us today. Andrea, I know you're rocking the camera today. Thank you so much for helping out. And we
Always welcome.
we have probably, through Storm by Seat Your Pants, brought thousands of students to check out the Toucan Rescue Ranch, and we can't wait to bring even more to visit virtually.
Thank you so much.
All
Bye,
right.
Joe. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya. All right. Oh man, every trip to the Toucan Rescue Ranch is so great. They're doing such amazing work. So please do check out the website. If you're going to be in Costa Rica and looking for a project to volunteer with, this is a great option. If you're interested in internships, it's worth checking out there as well. And if you can support the Toucan Rescue Ranch in any way, this is the spot to go and do this. They're doing great work in Costa Rica, rescuing and rehabilitating native wildlife, but then they also take in animals that have been pets for years and years and years and maybe given up by their owners or maybe in poor health, and they give them a home as well. When they can't be released into the wild, they give them a good, a place to live. And also what I love best is when people come to visit, they come and they visit, but there's no, pictures with the sloths. There's no holding the sloths because that's not what it's about. It's about giving them their space, rehabilitating them, and getting them back into the wild. Okay. I can't believe we're at this stage right now. It's been an incredible 3 days. Year 2 of the Women Blaze Trails Festival has been an absolute blast. We've been meeting amazing women all over the world, and we have one more event in store today. And I'm so excited to have Adele joining us. Over the last couple of years, I've gone to know Adele. I've got to host her with classrooms, even talk to her from underwater, which is pretty wild. Adele Luda is a scientist and innovator. She's worked at NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center as a certified mission control center flight controller and astronaut instructor, where she supported over 90 spacewalks. And she's been part of a team developing a lunar lander under NASA's Artemis program. She's a private pilot, a scuba diver. In her spare time, she likes to work on coral recovery projects. She was also recently selected as an If-Then ambassador for the American Association for the Advancement of Science, so to inspire youth to pursue STEM fields. I'm going to bring Adele in live with us right now. Hey, Adele, how are we doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me again. It's nice to be part of the festival this year.
Of course, Adele, it's always great to see you. Every time we chat, there's a new project, there's something else that you're working on. And actually, we talked to Sydney a little bit earlier, who's a If-Then ambassador as well. We connected yesterday, and I hear your statues from the If-Then ambassadors are moving to the Smithsonian.
They are. We're all going up to, well, as many as us can, we're going up to Washington, D.C. to celebrate the launch of the exhibit. And then you can visit them anytime in March.
All right. Awesome. Well, Adele, I'm going backstage again. I want you to take over for a little bit. Let's dive into your story, and then we'll wrap with a few questions.
All right, sounds good. Let me share my screen. And we'll go full screen. How's that look?
It didn't come up for us.
Oh, hang on.
There we go. I see it coming now. Perfect.
All right, we're full screen.
Looks good.
Great. Okay. So thank you so much. As I mentioned, it's such an honor to be back here and to be able to end the festival as well. We've had so many amazing women over the last 3 days. I was able to jump into some of the talks. And what I'm going to talk about today is human exploration, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently and hopefully kind of engage you as the audience at home in kind of feeling and thinking about what it's going to mean to go to these extreme environments. So a little bit of a shout out. On Friday was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. You might have seen on social media people playing STEM tag and back and forth and promoting some of the women who had inspired them. I wanted to share 3 books that have come out just recently that I've read all three, and I think they're really inspiring and fun to read for human spaceflight, because each one of them pulls apart something that's a little bit different about human spaceflight if you're interested in that. But they also were not the stories that were told as much when I was younger. I mean, we had some great biographies and autobiographies, especially of Apollo, but it's been wonderful to see these stories coming out. So Handprints on Hubble, and this is just a shout out, there's no sponsorship, it's just books that I think are really great that recently came out from, you know, your local library, or buy a book or get it digital. So Catherine Sullivan talks about the design of Hubble and the spacewalks involved to repairing Hubble and the tools and what took for the innovation and design. And then also Nicole, which I know talked earlier for during the festival, I think, she talks about her experiences with human spaceflight, but also focuses on conservation and art. And that's really kind of a unique combination there. And then Colonel Eileen Collins just came out with a book telling some of her select stories. And in this particular case, she really emphasizes kind of her leadership aspect. She was the first female shuttle commander, and also kind of getting out of your comfort zone. And I'm really excited to mention on this talk that Eileen was able to work together, giving a copy away free to anyone. I'm going to actually do a raffle. So if you follow this talk, there's going to be something that I'm going to say in the talk that is something that Eileen and I both talk about. She talks about in her book. I talk about it when I do my presentations. So something we have really emphasized in common. And if you go ahead and message me on social media, or you can email me through my website, and you mention that phrase, you're going to be part of a raffle to go ahead and receive a signed copy of her book. So I'm going to put all the names in a raffle, pick one. And of course, if you're younger, you're inspired by STEM, you know, feel free to tell me your age and who you are, and I'll give you a shout out, even if it's through your parents, for their handle or their address. So I'm just excited to share that with one of you, and of course, you know, share the message for today. So what I want to talk about is sustainable living on the moon. And in particular, this is a picture, just a graphic of what NASA has pushed out as far as Artemis and what this base camp is going to look like. And there's going to be some additional challenges to sustainably living on the moon versus just going and visiting for a couple of days. And here you see the vision's a little different because we have a lunar lander, a lunar habitat, but we also have, you know, an unpressurized rover, which we had a similar design during Apollo, but we're going to have a pressurized rover where the crew members can go inside and take their spacesuits and put them back on. We'll also have multiple people going outside and doing EVAs, which is very exciting for me because right now we normally do 2, and it was really neat to be able to see more teams of people outside. But sustainably living is going to be meaning that we're going to be there for a longer duration. And I'm going to talk about what it means to live in those extreme environments. You're also going to see that when we go back to the South Pole, it's very dark there. And so there's going to be a lot of additional lighting, communication, and power is going to be an additional challenge as well. So all these things are going to come to play. And why in particular the moon? Well, it's leading us back to Mars. So for you that are watching that's younger, that's inspired by STEM, what we've learned on the International Space Station, we're applying to the moon. And from the moon, we're applying that to Mars. And you can see here that Earth is a lot further away than it is in that perspective of being from the moon. And so we need to get it right. We really need to understand some of these challenges to be able to explore further. And so here's the part where I want to introduce something a little different to you guys. I want you to take a second and just, you're sitting or you're standing wherever you are, and I want you to kind of just observe everything around you. Take a second and feel your breath coming in and out. Something you probably don't even think about. Maybe you have a glass of something to drink next to you. Maybe you've gotten one earlier, you had lunch or breakfast. Think about things that are touching your skin, your feet on the floor, sitting in your seat or standing against a wall, what those sensations are like in gravity. Think about the temperatures you're feeling around you. Is it cold? Is it warm? Do you have a sweatshirt on? Is it sunny? And maybe you have the AC on or the heating on wherever you are. So all of these things that are kind of surrounding us in our daily life, and we don't really think about them as much. We think about, if we think about counting things or things that are limited, we might think about, I have 1 or 2 more TV shows on my favorite show that's coming out, and then I have to wait for the next season. Or you think about, I have 1 more of this particular food that I really like in the kitchen, then I got to go back to the grocery store. but we don't necessarily think about these things that are surrounding us. In some cases, you maybe even take them for granted. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those things. So let's just talk about atmosphere for right now. Let's talk about the breath of you breathing in and out and being able to, hang on, let me see if my video play. Just the wind around us and the air we breathe, and breathing in oxygen and breathing out that CO2, and not having toxins necessarily around us. Sometimes we have pollution, but the air provides that circulation. Thinking about water, and a lot of us, not everyone in the world, but a lot of us are able to go to our kitchen sink and we can get water straight out of the faucet and we can drink that water. And maybe you didn't finish the whole glass and you actually poured it out before you put the glass in the dishwasher or something like that. And so the water surrounding us is such an abundant resource on Earth that we're very lucky we have this. Another thing is just our surface, just everything around us, the dirt. Maybe you go outside and you think, oh, I have to take my shoes off before I come in the house, or I have to wash my hands if I've been doing something out in the garden, or I fell and I maybe got some dirt on my hands. But it's really like a secondary thought, and it's not something that we worry too much about because it's kind of always just there. And in some ways, it's a little bit harmless because we can just go wash our hands under the sink. Well, that's not the case when we go to these extreme environments. When we go to an extreme environment, and I pulled this definition off of Wikipedia if you'd like to go and kind of read more of that entry, but just for sake of generalization, being in an extreme environment means that it's going to be very difficult to survive. It's these extreme conditions such as temperature and energy. A lot of times you may not even have pressure. You could be in the vacuum of space. And so because of that, you really have to accommodate or sometimes pack or take the things we need in order to survive. And that's where exploring comes. So exploring by the seat of your pants, there are extreme environments on Earth. Those are our poles, some deserts, volcanoes, deep ocean trenches. And then, of course, in our solar system, except for Earth, every planet is considered an extreme environment. So we really have to think and count, as scientists and engineers, every single resource we bring. So when we are thinking about estimates or numbers about every breath, cleaning that atmosphere, temperature control, power, that water's very heavy. And so that's why you'll hear a lot of times going to extreme environments, we're looking for the water in places that it's already there that we can hopefully tap into, because water is very, very expensive to launch and go up into space. It goes down to the clothes we wear and the environments that we have for the humans. So when we go back to the moon, and I just wanted to play this fun video. I think sometimes when we look at pictures of extreme environments, we think, oh, okay, that's just a picture. This is a video I took at Spice Center Houston. I think the video with the 3 dimensions, I'll just play it real quick again. I think it brings it to life a little bit more, but imagine if that was an atmosphere and that was actually the vacuum of space. So, it really is something where we have to think about and count and be very precise in what we're doing when we send someone out to these extreme environments. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then I'll come back to what that's going to take specifically for spacesuits and integration of being able to do those spacewalks. So for me, my background is in physics. I really loved math when I was growing up as a kid. And when I discovered physics, it was a way for me to apply math to something and take it to that next level. And so generally there's 2 types of physicists. There's theoretical and experimental. I fall within the experimental line. But as a kid, I was really inspired by the astrophysics and understanding the universe and Big Bang and what does this mean. And so I actually started going to school thinking I was going to be a PhD researcher as an astrophysicist, and ended up really being more aligned with applied physics and being able to work with these multidisciplinary teams to overcome challenges for these extreme environments. And as Joe knows, and he mentioned, I loved doing that as well and exploring. But really solving these problems as teams is something that I really find rewarding and I really enjoy. And so here's a picture of me as a little girl. I would go sailing with my family. That was my first sense of exploring, and maybe I would be interested in that. We would go on Lake Michigan, and it was my sense of being on a team, which was my family. That's our first team. And then also safety, and always being aware of safety, and then, you know, exploring and kind of it being out there, you know, kind of away from a house, which was exciting. And in my 20s, as Joe mentioned, I had the honor of being an EVA instructor and flight controller at Johnson Space Flight Center, where I specialized in training astronauts on how to do the spacewalk. So getting in a suit, depressing, going outside, starting to learn those tasks that they would need to do outside, and then worked all the way through the retirement of shuttle and a couple increments for the space station. So the next field goal that's going to take us to the moon and Mars is Orion. And that is going to have to provide all of these conditions that I talked about for extreme environments. So we have to calculate that for Orion for the duration, whether it's a few days or it's 6 months to go to Mars. Additionally, what does that mean for spacesuits? Well, a lot of people don't realize that the spacesuit is a vehicle for one. So for that time that we're going to be in that vehicle, whether it's 6 or 8 or 10 hours, depending on all the different procedures and activities we have to do to get in and out of the spacesuit safely, to do the spacewalk, you know, we have to take all of those consumables. So during Apollo, we had a great spacesuit. It was amazing that the engineers were able to pull it together as well as they did, giving all the unknown things that we had. And now for the space station, we have a spacesuit you might have seen many more pictures of, which is for the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. But we're actually getting ready as a community in human spaceflight to make another spacesuit, and that spacesuit will first replace the one on ISS and then eventually be converted for our next spacesuit for the moon. And we're going to need more mobility. Again, we're going to need to do more EVAs out of that, extravehicular activities out of that spacesuit. And so the challenges are going to be a little bit different than they were for Apollo. And so there's a lot of learning and a lot of calculating we have to do to make sure that we set up those individuals, those explorers, in the best situation possible to survive these extreme environments. And of course, what we want to get to is something that's like the Martian, a suit that's very easy to put on and off, looks more like clothing than it does necessarily like a bulkier spacesuit, but we're not quite there yet. However, if this sounds exciting to you out there, you know, there's a lot of work still to be done for spacesuits, and I would encourage you to learn more about it and, you know, help us move that forward. Additionally, you know, one of the things I talked about was taking all these consumables, the water, the air, the pressure that we're going to need. So part of that atmosphere inside the spacesuit, the thermal control. But lunar regolith is additionally challenging in the fact that it's very, very sharp. And so it cuts things. And so here's an example of a video. This is my aviation glasses. You can see that I have scratches on them. I mean, just from normal wear and tear, throwing them in a bag every once in a while. You know, I try not to get scratches, but it happens. And they're actually pretty scratch resistant. But the regolith on the moon is highly, highly sharp. And so it not only will scratch the visors, but it'll scratch different aspects of the suit. It scratches your skin, and it's very sharp. And so you can't necessarily just brush it off or wash it off in the same way that you can just regular dirt or soil on Earth. So we're having to really take problems that we didn't think about as much before because we didn't have this challenge on Earth, and really have to break it down and think about how are we going to do this sustainably. Also, I want to mention that sometimes in life, you don't have to pick just one thing. So for me, physics is my love, and I love working in human spaceflight. But I additionally am a scuba diver, and I'm also a pilot, and I love flying seaplanes, and I do work with coral restoration in Florida. And those are hobbies, but science, as being a scientist, also pays me well enough that I can actually do those activities. So sometimes as a kid, you think, well, I have to pick one thing, and you actually don't necessarily always have to pick one thing. You can do a lot of really interesting hobbies or activities or crossover jobs in your life. And I was able to do these as well. And part of my scuba diving actually also applied when I worked at NASA as an astronaut instructor, because I was able to dive in the neutral buoyancy laboratory. And the reason I bring this up, because there's a transition of working in the pool, not just on the shuttle and the station, but now for the surface of the moon. And we're able to do measurements in metabolic rates when we're in the pool. And that allows us to get closer to understanding those consumables and how much of it we have to bring or account for when we go out to do these spacewalks. So Here's a couple of pictures I wanted to share with you. This is one picture where the astronauts now are starting to be actually on the surface of the moon, which is the pool, instead of floating around as they are when they're working neutrally buoyant for the space station. And then this is the rock yard, which is at Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston, Texas, where you can see they're working at night to simulate those nighttime, well, not nighttime, but I should say South Pole conditions that the astronauts are going to have when they go back to the moon. And so neither of these environments are going to replicate entirely what we're going to have, but we combine the data that we have and try to also combine models that we have to take that data to get as close as possible before we can get actual data on the new suit for the moon. So as a scientist, a lot of what we're trying to do is do our best estimates. You know, you've probably heard about, you know, hypothesis and trying to calculate things. Engineers also make assumptions. And then we pull that data together and then try to see how we can come together to actually get as close as possible to real life. And then, of course, once we have actual data, it makes it a lot easier for us to actually forward work a lot of those and optimize things. But there's a lot of unknowns right now, and so it's very challenging for us to try to figure that out. Even though we have a lot of experience on ISS, it's going to be interesting to see what the first lunar EVAs, surface EVAs, actually look like. And so it takes a large team. When I talk about these multidisciplinary teams, it's, you know, real data, but it's also doctors, engineers, scientists, computer programmers, and we're producing a model that's a human-machine teaming model. So it's also working with the computers and the software in a way that they are part of the team as well. And so in closing, what I want to share with you is it's always important if you want to work in a STEM field to get a solid degree. You know, a lot of these jobs now are very specific in the fact that you have to have a solid degree in science or engineering. So make sure you pay attention to that when you're looking at universities and you pick the major that will align best, because 4 years is a lot of work. Also, know your stuff. That is something that Colonel Collins and I agree with. You need to know your stuff. So it's not just about finishing school, but also making sure that you can apply it in real life. That's how you get to be on some of the cool projects, is if you really know your stuff. And change if you need to. It's okay. You know, I started in astrophysics and I pivoted to applied physics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's just refining what you know. It's gonna take work. Being in a STEM field does take work. It's worth it. And it's going to take many little choices. It's not necessarily one big choice you make, but it's all the little choices you make over time. And sometimes the world only sees those big ones. It's also going to take some struggling. You know, even if you got straight A's all through school, you know, you're going to get to a point probably in college or even in real life where it's still there's still going to be challenges. And that's good. That's getting out of your comfort zone. That's learning more. That's pushing boundaries. That's when you're doing the cool projects. And sometimes the world is only going to acknowledge those successes, but don't worry, because, you know, with each failure, you're learning something. And I just want to end with, there is a place for you and we need you and you're going to make a difference. So just keep that in mind when you're struggling or you're working hard, that you are part of what we need. So again, just as a reminder, I just wanted to thank you so much for this opportunity. Here is my social media accounts. If you like hearing about seaplane flying and coral restoration and human spaceflight, feel free to follow me because that's what I talk about. But also, you have until midnight tonight to go ahead and send me a message about what Colonel Collins and I both agree on, and I will put you in a raffle for a free copy. So I'm gonna exit and stop sharing there.
Awesome. Adele, thank you so much. What a great presentation. So many things stuck out to me there. One being your advice not to be afraid to kind of try new things and go with the flow. And, you know, career changes to different fields is natural and normal. There's no, I think one thing that we've learned this weekend is there's no right path to getting to science or exploration or adventure or conservation. Everybody's path is different, and that's a good thing. It brings so many different perspectives into so many different fields.
Absolutely. And I think also when you've tried different things, you're more likely to be adaptable even in your own field. So even if you are pretty sure what you want to do, having those experiences helps you overcome the challenges then.
Yep. And then you might not be able to answer this totally, but How far off do you think we are from that next gen spacesuit?
So pretty close, because NASA put out a release for proposals in the fall, and several companies, some of which have announced publicly, applied, and then they're looking to award sometime in 2022 the contract. And that means that those companies will have to align, especially with SpaceX, which has won the first landing for the moon. So they'll be working to make sure that they're compatible to go outside.
It's exciting. It's a really exciting time we're in right now. One thing that drives me crazy is sometimes I think students hear or are told that we've made all the big discoveries. There really isn't anything left to explore and discover, and that couldn't be further from the truth. What advice would you give to a student who's interested in pursuing a career in science, and maybe even tailor a little bit more to a young girl in science who has maybe heard, why do you want to do that?
I think that one thing I found, which is so nice, is that it's never too early to start. So there is a ton of YouTube, there's resources, more so than even when I was a kid. So go ahead and it's never too early. You can listen to a lecture, you can read a book, and if you don't understand every word in there, that's okay. As scientists and and when we were in school, it took a couple of times sometimes for us to learn concepts. And so reach out and just read and explore and watch videos. It's really never too early to start, especially if you find that you're in middle school or high school and you're kind of bored with your curriculum. There's just so many other things you can do to kind of enrich your experience. And I think the other thing is, as explorers, and Joe, we hear stories all the time. If you read about these explorers, them customizing the stuff they needed to do the exploration, whether they built their own gear or they were, building their own exploration ships, or all these parts, building their own teams. When you're at those boundaries, when you're pushing forward, you're not going to find the one size fits all, and you're not probably going to be part of that one size fits all. So as explorers, I think we learn to make or modify or adapt or do. And again, it's never too early to do that. But I think there's no sense of exclusion, because really in some ways everybody's excluded until you decide you're going to include yourself and you're going to make it happen to be there and to do the thing you want to do. So I think it's always just part of telling yourself, like, this is what I want to do, this is where I am, and I belong here.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. And that's a story that you hear time and time again is, oh, this doesn't exist yet, or this isn't possible to study. Well, there's people who hear stuff like that and say, challenge accepted, and pioneer, forge away, try something, look at it from a different angle, bring somebody in who maybe you wouldn't think of collaborating with, and finding those solutions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the festival. It's been wonderful.
Oh, Adele, it's an absolute treat to have you joining us. I do want to take a quick moment here and just share, I know you shared it already, but let's just share two things here. First, the link to the IFTHAN ambassador page. So obviously we can find your profile and some of the amazing women who you've shared this honor with, and who are doing so much to push STEM, the STEM field out to younger students, especially young girls. And then I do want to share again here these links. So to your Twitter, to your Instagram, if you want to follow along with Adele's adventures, you can do so right there. All right. Well, Adele, again, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining the Women Blaze Trails Festival. Thank you for being, I guess, the headliner, the closer, the final act for the festival. It was great to see you. Great to hear what you've been up to. And thanks for the great advice that you've given to those joining us today.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Have a great weekend, Adele. Thank you. Oh, switch there. There we go. We are at that stage. It has been just an incredible weekend. Over 30 speakers joining us from all around the world, sharing their stories, sharing challenges, sharing adventures, research, explorations, all over the world. All of these events we are going to put into a playlist. Actually, the first 2 days are already up on our channel. I will get today's events up into the playlist. They can be viewed at any time, shared to anybody you like to come and check out those live events. Thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you to everybody who's been tuning in over the weekend, those sending in comments, sending emails. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to host this festival, and share all of these amazing stories with you. As we wrap up for today, 2 reminders. If you haven't visited already, visit exploringbytheseat.com. We, each month during the school year, up to 60 live events for classrooms to meet scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists all around the world. It's free for classrooms everywhere to join. 45 or so live events this month. We've kicked all the men out, and we're hosting women in science and exploration and adventure and conservation. We have such an amazing lineup this month, and really every month. So whether you're an educator or a parent or a student or just someone who's curious, check out that website. And finally, one more website to check out. This weekend was made possible through Lenovo EDU. We thank them so much for their support. Lenovo makes incredible products, incredibly useful in the world of education, of course, things like tablets and computers and other devices, but they're also pulling together this amazing community of like-minded individuals. Here's a link to the community in the US. Doesn't matter if you are a teacher or a parent or a student, again, someone curious about science and exploration, take a look, check out the resources, register. Great people to connect with, great people to talk to. And if you are an educator, it's a great like-minded community where you can share resources and ideas and things like that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining this weekend. We will play us out with one more spin of Lenovo Sizzle Reel. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the Super Bowl if that's what you're going to be doing tonight. We are signing off for now.